just not low. Ay, 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 ay. Oh, fuck you. Oh, no, wrong button. Fuck. Don't use spray paint in the house. I'm fine, I'm fine. I am not fine. Is there a doctor in the house? I have medical questions. Do-do-do-do-do, turning that off. Do-do-do-do, what the fuck is happening? Alright, welcome to the mess. As you can tell, I acquired some horns. And I am spray painting some of them, so... Oh god, he looks like he shit himself. Okay, go with it. Are you not hot? Did I unplug you? I didn't unplug you. Were you broken? Ah, nope, you're fucking hot. Hello. I'm not blowing up a bear's ass, but maybe I am. Alright. Anyway, good evening everybody. If you're new to my stream, this is the world's most boring live stream, where I work on some things, listening to some audio, and never talk to anybody on the chat, because that would require multitasking. And I suck at that.
If I had a nickel for every time a woman disappeared after separating from her friends on a well-marked trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, I'd have 2 nickels, which is not a lot in today's economy. I'm Aiden Madison. Welcome back to the Lore Line.
Just not a lot in this economy. Alright. Alright, so I got bear. Chicken leg bear. I'm just gonna good. So he's going over to the side. Working on the goat. Got his eyes on. His horns are still drying, but I got him in 3 different colors, white, blue, and green, so they're currently staining purple right now. He's going to have his upgrade for his horns. Like so. Okay, and this is going to have upgrades for their horns too. I don't know what I wanted to do with that elephant head though. If anybody remembers, let me know. Like I said, I use spray paint in the house. I should not be live streaming. I should not be online. These are the big ones. They're blue, so I went over with a little bit of purple so that I have like a little bit of a gradient color. And I added some sticks to the bottom because I need a way to attach them. I fucked up the right here. I don't know if I can fix that. I don't want to add another coat of spray paint, but I think I'm going to have to do this one. Damn it! When I was putting the contact cement on the bottom, a little bit got on top, and now I get that mess. Oh, these are the good ones too. Purple horns. Get a little gradient to them. I kind of like it, so we're going to go with it. Nope, those do not go there. As for what we're listening to tonight, it is going to be the puzzling disappearance of Polly Melton.
Melton? I don't know.
Please, just play. Thank you. The remote is fucking dying on me. Feels like I could put you in, couldn't I?
It's pretty easy to get lost in the woods. In fact, considerably more so than most people think. Paths will sometimes become overgrown, weather conditions may obscure landmarks, and false trails often lead people astray. Even well-trodden marked routes like the Appalachian Trail can become confusing in some places, and in some places people leave simply because they think they can carve a better path by themselves. The vast majority of these individuals are eventually found, though not necessarily alive. But even when somebody is found deceased, the state of their remains and their physical location usually allows investigators to piece together what happened from the point that they left the trail to the point that they met their fate. Every once in a while, however, someone just vanishes into thin air, such as 7-year-old Dennis Martin or 16-year-old Trenny Gibson, both of whom disappeared in the Smokies without leaving a single clue as to where they'd gone. Having looked over a number of these disappearances in the Great Smokies over the last several months, what I did notice is that most of these people are young, between the ages of, 7 at the youngest with Dennis Martin, and then up into the mid-20s with Mark Hansen. So at first glance, it might seem like it's something to do with youth, but when it comes to Thelma Pauline Melton, that simply can't be the case. The 58-year-old woman, who stood at 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed around 180 pounds, was last seen walking in the Deep Creek area of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a place with which she was deeply familiar. Pauline's father, Fred McAllister, was a part owner of a campground just south of the Deep Creek entrance to the park, and for over 20 years, Pauline had spent her summers there. In late September of 1981, Pauline and her husband Bob were staying at that campground when the former left to go on a walk with her friends Trula Gudger and Pauline Cannon, and she would never return. And unlike many of our other cases, this one did not occur deep inside of the park, miles from paved roads and civilization. Nor did this happen along a more wild trail with plenty of confusing offshoots. No, Pauline went missing just 1 mile into the park along a gravel road which she walked without incident for over 2 decades. A trail which was right next to the very deep creek after which the campground and the area were named. Between her familiarity with the trail, the fact that that trail was, for all intents and purposes, a gravel road, and the fact that Deep Creek runs directly out of the park and back to the very doorstep of what was once their campground, you have to wonder, how the hell did she get lost? Despite how odd the circumstances of her disappearance were, Pauline's story is not nearly as well known as many of the missing 411 cases you'll find on YouTube. In fact, even David Paulides' entry in his Eastern United States book is really only about 2 pages long. According to Paulides, his information regarding this case was gleaned from National Park Service documents retrieved via a FOIA request, review of archived newspaper articles, and interviews with potential witnesses and participants in the search. Now, the majority of his narrative seems to come from one book that we've seen him cite before, Unsolved Disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains by Juanita Baldwin, even though it is not listed as a source in this section. Ramsey case that we covered.
I'm actually using broken pencils for this because I do not have any dowels on me right now when it's
like
just
a summary of the material in Baldwin's book than it does David's original work. That said, while I've been unable to find any National Park Service files online about this case myself, it is possible that David Paulides has access to something that is not yet on the internet. So it is possible that he got his information that way, and then of course there's the papers. Now, speaking of papers, one thing that has been a constant struggle for me when researching these cases in the past has been finding reliable information about what happened via the news media. Newspapers.com has been an absolute godsend because I'm almost always able to find a contemporary article on whatever I'm researching. But when I can't, I'm forced to sign up for subscription after subscription after subscription to random local news websites. And then I see them show up, in my bank statements every month, and I'm like, when did I subscribe to the news media in some small town in Australia? When did I do that? And because, it's something that I do really quickly and then never think about again, I don't notice it until I've spent hundreds of dollars on a website I don't read. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about our partner for today's video, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that, along with helping you to cancel those unwanted subscriptions, also works with you to help lower your bills and to manage your money better. What makes Rocket Money so great is that it securely and safely identifies recurring charges and then uses that information to help you cancel unwanted subscriptions.
Working
In
on
fact,
some
you can
things
even do it
tonight.
from the app itself with just a couple of taps. As someone who
Waiting for
absolutely loathes
glue to
dealing
dry.
with customer service on the phone, that is just so nice. But in addition to helping you manage your subscriptions, Rocket Money will also allow you to upload pictures of your bills, and then just with a few taps, you can tell Rocket Money, hey, can you renegotiate this for me? The end result is that when users take advantage of all of Rocket Money's features, they're able to save up to $740 a year on their bills and expenses. In total, that adds up to more than $500 million saved across Rocket Money's 5 million users. If you're ready to start saving
Here's the
more
other
and spending
cord.
less, then you can go to
Purple,
rocketmoney.com/lorelodge
purple. Here we
or
go.
click the link right in the description to get it for
This
free
thing.
today. And if you like the free version and you're looking for a few more features, well, Rocket Money offers a paid premium version. Once again, if you'd like to give Rocket Money a try, you can go to rocketmoney.com/lorelodge or click the link in the description and get started for free today.
Since forever, we've hated Mondays. Monday.
I need to wait for these to
But
dry, and I'm
it
not
doesn't
doing
have to be
that.
like
And I
this.
really need to stop.
Introducing
Because I'm too fucking stubborn.
our modern, award-winning formulas. Smooth against whatever life throws at you. No more bad Mondays.
Yeah, I don't
Monday,
care
hair
about
care.
Mondays. There you go. Stay upright, you fucker. I should have got him to print
On
out some
October 2nd,
stems with these. I
1981,
just
the
didn't
Knoxville
have
News Sentinel published an
time,
article by
the
staff writer
patience,
Carson Brewer
or the
entitled
common sense to do
Frightening
that.
Mystery of Great Smoky's Hiker, Frightening Mystery of Missing Great Smoky's Hiker, Rose. It is a frightening puzzle, Brewer wrote. What happened to Thelma Pauline Melton, missing from a much-used easy trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park for a week today? Pauline, who went by Polly, was part of a group of about 10 families which leased a plot of land beside Deep Creek, just outside the park, and placed their trailer homes there. According to Ranger Ron Cornelius, the reason they did this was that they wanted to stay in the area longer than the Park Service would allow at their campgrounds. To give you specifics, some of the families who stayed at this campground would stay there all the way from April through the end of October. So this wasn't just the kind of place where people couple of weeks during
like I should
summer,
add some orange to
staying,
these.
and then heading back home. This was basically where many of these people lived half of their year. For Pauline and her husband Bob, their home in the winters was in Florida. If I'm not mistaken, Jacksonville, Florida. This group of families was reportedly pretty exclusive about who was allowed into the campground, not permitting any newcomers unless every family favored admitting the new family. And having bought in back in 1958, the Meltons were one of the longest-running members of this group. And as we mentioned earlier in the video, and according to the Charlotte Observer, Pauline's husband Bob wasn't her only connection to the campground. Her father, Fred McAllister, was an old friend of her husband and an owner himself. Sadly, Polly hadn't had great luck with her husbands. Her first husband, Earl Bozeman, dying of unmentioned reasons in the early 1950s, and then her second husband, Tom McKeithen, died of throat cancer sometime after that. It's hard to tell exactly. The Observer article seems to imply he also died in the 50s. Though 20 years Polly's senior, Bob Melton was a widower himself, and the two got married at the campground in 1975. Of course, along with Bob, Polly had several other friends in their little community, which was mostly made up of retirees. Going back to that article in the Knoxville News Sentinel, Brewer wrote, near the middle of the afternoon last Friday, that being September 25th, 1981, Mrs. Melton and two friends, Mrs. Trula Gudger and Mrs. Pauline Cannon, walked from their summer home trailers up through the Deep Creek campground and on up a road along the creek to a turnaround. It's about 2 miles, 4 miles round trip. The three women had been friends for a very long time, Ranger Dan Burnett telling the Elizabethton Star that this was a routine they followed since 1958. On many days, the paper continued, Some of them would hike 2 miles up Deep Creek Trail, an easy walking path that snakes beside Deep Creek and up to the aforementioned turnaround point. According to Ranger Chuck Harris, she liked the particular trail she hikes on because it was an easy trail with, and this is important, an excellent roadbed. I haven't been on this trail myself, but taking a look at it over on All Trails, it seems to be pretty straightforward and easy, with an elevation gain of only 253 feet, that's 77 meters, across the 2 miles to the turnaround. According to Ranger Ron Cornelius, they reached that point without any issue. Then, after they'd walked about a half mile of the return, Mrs. Melton started walking faster and got several yards ahead of her friends. Depending on the source, the number of yards seems to vary a little bit. I've seen everything from she was just ahead to she was 75 yards ahead to she was half a mile ahead. I would wager that the 75 yards part seems to be the most accurate based on everything I saw. Part of the reason I err on the 75 yard aspect is because of the reporting by Carson Brewer, who wrote that the ranger said the others considered this a little unusual and that they called to her making some comment about her walking so fast, and she looked back and laughed. Typically, calling out is something that you say in the context of, having to speak to somebody who's a ways off from you. You wouldn't call out to somebody who's only 10 yards in front of you. You would just talk to them. Similarly, you probably wouldn't call out to somebody who's like half a mile ahead of you because they probably won't hear you. So to me, that does imply that she was probably, somewhere between like 50 and 100 yards away. Obviously, that's something of an assumption, but I would argue it's a reasonable one. In any case, sometime following this interaction where Polly was ahead of them and they called out to her, she turned around, looked at them, and laughed. About a mile from the trailhead, Polly rounded a bend over a slight hill and disappeared from view. Based on the descriptions given in the papers, which were generally that she went up a slight incline and then around a bend and they lost sight of her going over that hill, I believe it was likely about right here that they lost sight of her. Trula and the other Pauline clearly thought that this behavior was a little bit odd, but they figured that she had just gone ahead and they'd see her back at the campsite. So they continued onward, got home, and upon reaching the campground, realized, oh, Polly's not here. Not only was she not there, but nobody had seen her return.
Okay,
when they learned she had not come back, the News Sentinel reads, the two women and Mrs. Cannon's husband, Jack, walked back over the entire route of the hike to look for her. When their search turned up nothing, they alerted the park rangers, who managed to get a search team out there around 5 p.m. Before dark, search for miles up the Deep Creek Trail and side trails she might have taken, including the Nolan Divide Trail, Indian Creek Trail, and the Hammer Branch Trail to Wank Falls. The Indian Creek and Hammer Branch Trails both branch off just beyond where I believe she was last seen, while the Nolan Divide Trail actually leads directly from the campground. In addition to the rangers involved in the initial search, dogs were also brought in the first 3 days.
I'll open your window for you.
In order to limit scent contamination in the area, the number of people actually involved in the search was itself also limited. Despite their best efforts to preserve the scent, however, the Asheville Times
I like it. It's mine. The prices blow my mind. I feel so rich. I feel like a billionaire. I'm shopping like a billionaire. I'm shopping like a billionaire. I'm shopping like a billionaire. I get it straight from me because I'm shopping like a billionaire.
Download the Taboo app and shop like a billionaire. For cold and flu symptom relief, there's a comforting cup of Neocitrin, the power of soothing relief.
The Asheville Times reported on Tuesday the 29th that the dogs were unable to pick up a trail, and that Ranger Burnett said Monday would likely be the last day that searchers would use the tracking dogs. Instead, they reported on Tuesday that the search would be expanded, with foot units covering a larger area in the search, and that organizations participating were the North Carolina Search and Rescue Dog Association team from Canton, the Civil Air Patrol, and several Air Force personnel. I would give you more details about how the search was conducted and where they went and what they found, but there aren't any. So far as I can tell, 12 to 15 rangers, a few dogs, and a helicopter, all that they used during this search. By Friday, October 2nd, investigators were beginning to believe that it was more likely Polly was not any longer in the park. This was because during those few days that they were searching, they found absolutely no evidence that she had ever left the trail. No sign of a struggle, no sign that anybody was dragged, no footprints leading away, just She wasn't there. Granted, the search area was rather limited, but that was largely due to the fact that all of the people who knew Polly had told investigators she did not like rugged hikes. And if you've ever been down into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, everything is rugged. Even a lot of the trails themselves are pretty rugged, but you go off trail and it's just dense underbrush as far as the eye can see, which is not far. One possibility, the News Sentinel reported, is that she could have left the park in an automobile, which were permitted in the campground but not beyond the gate at the upper end of it. While Deep Creek Trail is described as being essentially a gravel road, it seems that vehicles were not allowed beyond the campground unless it was National Park Service official business. If it were the case that Polly had left the park, or at least the campground, in an automobile, then one thing had to be true. Either she intended to disappear, or she was kidnapped right there in the parking lot. The latter would be pretty brazen, given that there was a good possibility that somebody in the campground or just outside of it would have heard Polly scream if she was attacked, but of course it is also possible that somebody could have pulled a gun, said keep quiet, things along those lines. In any case, her friend seemed certain that she would not have gotten into an automobile with anyone she did not know unless she was forced to. That obviously would imply foul play, and the pot of spaghetti sauce she'd left simmering back at the campground, as well as the widely reported fact that she wasn't carrying any cigarettes on her person, despite being a 2-pack-a-day smoker, supported the conclusion that she intended to return home that evening. But who would have taken her, and why? If by some miracle she was still there in the park, however, rangers were not optimistic. Brewer reported that some park officials think that if she is still in the park, chances of finding her are becoming pretty slim. That said, they did hold out some hope because the weather has not yet been so cold that she would have died of exposure, and she probably could have found water. She almost certainly could have found water. There are creeks everywhere. What was more concerning was Polly's physical condition, because in addition to being a 2-pack-a-day smoker, Ranger Ron Cornelius said that she was also suffering from hypertension. Hypertension is when your blood pressure is consistently higher than normal, and it causes an elevated risk for things like heart disease, stroke, aneurysm, kidney disease, and even vascular dementia. For reasons not noted in the paper, she also recently had a prescription for a tranquilizer filled just prior to her disappearance, which Polly's sister Kit Postel suggested could have had something to do with it. From what I can tell, the tranquilizer was the benzodiazepine Valium. Today, you probably wouldn't hear Valium referred to as a tranquilizer, but back in the 1980s, the terminology was a little different. Valium is in the same family of drugs as Xanax and Ativan, but it's a little bit faster acting and it doesn't last quite as long. It's the kind of thing you might be prescribed for acute panic attacks or just before you go into something like a minor surgery. I was given Valium before I had my wisdom teeth out, for example. When you take Valium, it usually relaxes your system to the point where you feel a little bit dazed. It's not like it doesn't make you loopy necessarily, but you're going to be a little slow to react to things. And that was the concern here. The paper specifically says that Kit Postel's reason to be concerned was that Pauline Melton might have become dazed and somehow wandered away. She also expressed frustration in the November 5th article of the Charlotte Observer at how the search was handled and communicated, especially since it was given up after only 4 or 5 days. After having patiently waited for 40 days, we've had absolutely no word, Kit reportedly said. It's easy to say she's not in the park, but how do they know? They haven't let the family know Doodlum Squat. Doodlum Squat's a new one for me. I heard Diddley Squat growing up. Trula Gudger had similar concerns, the paper reporting that she said, I think she's still in those woods. I don't think she walked out of there. She suggested that Polly may have had a mental collapse, or that she could have had an aneurysm and walked off the trail in confusion. But despite these concerns, the Park Service remained steadfast that Polly had left the park. In that same November 5th article entitled Missing Woman's Family Wants Probe, Observer reporter Dot Jackson reported that park officials maintain Melton left the park and say there is no evidence of foul play. I'm only going to bring this up right now because it's been relevant to recent discussions about recent cases that we've had, but it's not super important in this case. There is a serious difference between there is no evidence of foul play and we have ruled foul play out. A certain group of people under public scrutiny at the time of recording this video keep saying that the police say there is no evidence of foul play and therefore they have been cleared. That's not what that means, Proudfoots. Part of the reason that this little aside is also relevant to this discussion is that the paper also noted regarding the disappearance of Pauline Melton that the FBI could not become involved in the case unless there was suspicion of foul play. As those following the case I was referring to here, I'm just going to come out and just openly say I'm
out the window? You're not? No. You've already had food. You're not hungry. You're just bored.
Sebastian Rogers. For those who have been following that case, you may be aware that the FBI recently offered a $50,000 reward for anybody who came forward with information leading to the recovery of Sebastian Rogers. Many people on the wonderful cesspool known as Reddit keep saying that the FBI getting involved here does not imply foul play. The FBI getting involved implies exactly one here, and it is foul play. Or, I should say, in my opinion, the FBI offering a reward for the finding of Sebastian Rogers implies that the FBI is suspicious that foul play may have been related to said disappearance. In my opinion. Allegedly. Perhaps. Perchance. So in this case, the National Park Service basically came out and said, we're not investigating this as foul play at all. We're not suspicious that there is foul play at all. Therefore, the FBI isn't going to get involved. In addition to that, the sheriff of the county did not have any jurisdiction over the national park, so he couldn't get involved without their request either. But interestingly enough, the government of North Carolina pretty heavily implied to the Melton family and their friends that they should request the assistance of the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. So that would suggest that the North Carolina officials involved looked at this case and went, I think there might be foul play, but I can't get involved without a request either. Since the National Park Service was refusing to make that request, the Melton, Postel, McAllister family as a whole could go to the Attorney General and request their involvement. Doing that would have allowed the State Bureau of Investigation to get involved. And then one final, possibly relevant detail comes out of the news reporting on November 5th, which was the information that Polly may have been wearing a considerable amount of diamond jewelry. The Observer reported that a Bryson City man who did not know the Postels had told them that the woman who disappeared was known to wear a lot of jewelry, and local people suspected it might have attracted the attention of someone who could have forced her off the trail. Polly's sister Kim confirmed that this was possible, saying she probably did have on a couple of rings and a diamond watch band. I will say that the specificity here raises my eyebrows a little bit regarding, how this information came to me. That's very specific. It's totally possible that she wore the exact same jewelry every day, but Kit was not there, so that's why I'm questioning it a bit. I don't think it's something to blow up over. I don't think it's something to immediately turn my eyes and go, oh, well, this was clearly Kit's attempt to get rid of Polly so that she could have the entire inheritance when their 89-year-old father, who was in poor health, passed away. I'm not saying that, and this is not an ironic thing of me being like, I'm not saying, this is me being serious. I don't think this alone is enough evidence to get there. What I do think it might be evidence of is that maybe they were trying to give a reason to call for foul play, because that piece of information did not appear until long after the formal search had ended. In addition to that, I have not found any corroborations from Trula, the other Pauline, or anyone else at the campground that Polly was wearing that jewelry that day. Still, with all of that information out in the open, with all the reported information indicating that she intended to return to the campground, the only reason I'd hesitate to suspect foul play in this is the broad daylight of it all. For Juanita Baldwin, however, there's a different reason. Lot's wife was on Sodom and Gomorrah Road. She looked back and became a pillar of salt. Her fate is explained in the Bible. On September 25th, 1981, Polly Melton was hiking Deep Creek Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. She looked back and vanished. Her fate is yet to be explained. That is the opening passage of the Unsolved Disappearances narrative of the Pauline Melton story, and oh boy is that one of the paragraphs of all time. Strange opening passage aside, Baldwin's version of events largely followed in line with the narrative that we constructed from the news reporting, though several additional details present in her retelling drive her to a somewhat different conclusion. Instead of a kidnapping, Baldwin seems partial to the idea of an intentional disappearance based upon several factors. Under the subheading of Analyzing Polly's Life, Baldwin writes that on Monday, September 28, 1981, following Polly's disappearance on Friday, Tom Harris, pastor of Victory Baptist Church, told park rangers Mrs. Melton had spoken with him and seemed slightly depressed of late. However, he allegedly emphasized that she was not as depressed as she had been 2 years ago when she was a heavy user of Valium. In his opinion, she was not suicidal, but was not as active or tidy as she had been in the spring. Baldwin added that Pastor Harris had found out that a bottle of Valium prescribed for Bob Melton was missing from their trailer. Bob missed it after Polly disappeared. I'll get to why I emphasize that in a moment. In addition to the comments on drugs and depression, Pastor Harris apparently also revealed that he thought one conversation with Mrs. Melton might be significant, and that conversation had occurred about 3 years before she disappeared. It was just after Polly's mother had passed away, and Harris had tried to comfort her with the thought she would see her mother in heaven one day, at which point Mrs. Melton had said she wanted to go to heaven. Following this, she talked about persons who were running around on their spouses. She said she would never do that. According to Baldwin, in thinking back over their conversation, Pastor Harris said he had come to feel that Mrs. Melton had committed adultery and felt guilty. Along with that information from Harris, Baldwin also notes that on October 6, 1981, Nell Rickman, the supervisor at the Bryson City Presbyterian Church Nutrition Center, provided the authorities with new information. It should be noted that that is a different church from Tom Harris. Tom Harris was Victory Baptist. This is Bryson City Presbyterian. Supposedly, Nell had been out of town when the incident occurred, and she was therefore unable to get her relevant information to authorities until after the search had been suspended. This information does not appear in the papers, but Baldwin This information does not appear in the papers, but Baldwin earlier in the chapter noted that Polly volunteered at that distribution center, that nutrition center, it appears to have been something of a food bank, every Friday. She went on to say that the procedure at the center was for volunteers to sign up at the end of the day for the next day they intended to work, and that while she had worked on the 24th, Polly did not sign up to work on the 25th. Apparently she offered no explanation to anybody for why she hadn't signed up, though it's unclear if anybody actually asked. But another unusual thing that Polly did on this particular weekend was that she allegedly made several phone calls using the church telephone, and investigators were unable to determine where these calls went, and nobody who knew Polly remembered receiving any calls from her on that day. Baldwin says that she interviewed several of the patrons at the nutritional center during her research, and related that they found Polly to be friendly and helpful, and also told Baldwin about a time that she had joked about giving up on weight loss. Allegedly, the 5'10" or 11-inch tall, 170 or 180 pound Polly told them, "If fate would grant me a wish, I would wish to be light enough to walk without leaving footprints." Once again, I will draw your attention to the specificity of that comment. Earlier in the chapter, Baldwin had remarked that in her youth, Polly could probably have been described as an Amazonian beauty, and although she never confided that there had been lovers in her life, those who knew her had little doubt. At this point, however, she was overweight, suffering from high blood pressure and nausea, and taking medication for them. And Baldwin continues, writing that some of those who knew her had wondered privately if Polly was on the brink of a domestic apocalypse. Towards the end of the chapter, the author brings this notion of domestic unhappiness back around, noting that there have been rumors that she simply walked away from her life and began a new life with a new partner. Baldwin, writing in the third person, and in the sense that she said Juanita Baldwin interviewed people, not the author interviewed people. I don't know, maybe that bugs me for no reason, but it does bug me. She continued on to say that the rangers she interviewed were convinced that Polly was too intelligent and too strong to have gone with a kidnapper without a struggle. Now, in my opinion, that doesn't really track with what the rangers told the papers about Polly, which was that she was very unhealthy in multiple ways. And also, just because she would have put up a fight does not necessarily mean that she would have won that fight. On the other hand, the Rangers allegedly remembered her as a big woman and a pleasant camper who knew the area too well to have become lost, even under medication. And they believed that had she found herself to be lost, she would have just sat down and awaited rescue. Baldwin also claims they told her that there was no bear in the area large enough to have eaten or dragged away a woman her size, so far that no trace of her could be found by the time the search was made. While I don't doubt that the Rangers would have dismissed animal predation, I am skeptical of Baldwin's explanation for why, given that black bears are absolutely big enough to do that. You would also have to consider that had Polly seen a black bear and become frightened of it, she probably would have run away, which means that she would have ended up off trail somewhere. The issue there is that given how out of shape she was and the fact that she was not accustomed to hiking rugged terrain, she probably would not have made it all that far, and over the course of the several days that followed, the dogs probably would have smelled her decomposing. Unless, of course, she was in fact attacked by a bear, killed, and then buried underground, which some dogs wouldn't necessarily catch. That said, the dogs found absolutely no scent trail whatsoever, so this is kind of up in the air. Dogs are not infallible. You would think that they would have found something. They didn't. It could go either way here. Point is, I question what Baldwin said here. It's not that I question how the Rangers did their search. I question what Baldwin said, and I'll get into my reasons later. Because I have more reasons than just that one thing. Anyway, at the end of the chapter, the author wraps everything up by suggesting that perhaps fate granted Polly's wish to walk away without leaving footprints. And if Baldwin's information is accurate, it does seem like a fair question. But can we trust Baldwin? When you Google the Pauline Melton disappearance, you will probably see sites like the Charlie Project and the Doe Network, both amateur but generally well-regarded databases, uncritically accepting Baldwin's narrative as an accurate representation of events. Typically, I would structure this kind of critique a little bit differently, but for the fact that nearly every article directly cites Baldwin's work on this case, and for that reason, I feel the need to address some credibility issues. I initially encountered this while researching for a different case in this cluster, and to be honest, it was the content of that chapter that raised my eyebrows. First, though, I want to address some issues within the Polly Melton chapter. For example, Baldwin claims that contacts with Polly's two former husbands yielded no leads, which is certainly true, because her two former husbands had been dead for years according to the papers. It's kind of hard to excuse that kind of an oversight as just a simple mistake, and it's also not the only one. Baldwin also says that Polly had her cigarettes on her when she disappeared, while the papers emphatically say the opposite. And then another issue is that it was Polly that had the Valium prescription, not Bob. So while it's not impossible that Bob might have noticed that a Valium bottle was missing, it also isn't ever said that Bob had his own Valium prescription, or that Pauline had a Valium bottle missing. Like, there's absolutely no report I could find that said that there was a missing Valium bottle. You would think that if the investigators found a missing Valium bottle, that would have been mentioned somewhere, considering that her being on Valium was in fact mentioned. Specifically, you would assume that in Dot Jackson's article on November 5th for the Charlotte Observer, this would be mentioned, since that is the article that mentions the tranquilizer.
She's an older woman,
Considering
so
the
they don't
fact
care.
that Baldwin does not cite a single written source throughout the entirety of this chapter, really throughout the entirety of the book, one should be extremely cautious in taking her words at face value, especially when she claims people said something in interviews and then doesn't provide any corroboration. But, like I said, my concerns over Baldwin's credibility extend beyond this chapter, and first arose when I was researching the Abe Ramsey case. I do feel like I should really quickly explain, because we get comments about this sometimes, that people are going, why are you attacking these people? Why are you tearing down the work of others? Why can't you just be supportive? I come from an academic background. Peer review is just what we do. I know that sounds a little dismissive, a little smug, maybe a little arrogant, but I'm just getting tired of explaining it to people. When I criticize David Paulides' work, I'm not impugning his character. I'm saying I don't think his work is credible. Somebody can both be a good person and a bad researcher. There's a reason that when I attack someone's work, I attack their work, not their person, not who they are. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm not coming in here to say that Juanita Baldwin is a bad person who's making up stories. I'm not saying that about David Paulides either. I'm just saying that reading their work, I'm not particularly inclined to trust it. In fact, if you go back and look at our comment sections on videos that are really over a year and a half old, you'll see a lot of people going, hey, this person did this case also, and they found some things that you got wrong here. One of the most common that we saw was people going, hey, you got this wrong, everybody go watch the Missing Enigmas videos. So I went and I watched the Missing Enigmas videos, went, oh, I got this wrong, and then I DM'd Nick and was like, hey, do you want to come on and talk about Missing 411 with me? And now we have a great working relationship. I feel that the quality of my work has improved as a result of people telling me I was wrong and need to do better research. That's all I'm doing here, is the exact same thing as those commenters. So I apologize if that came across as rude or smug. It was not intended that way. I didn't write this down. It's kind of off the cuff. All that is to say that when I'm criticizing somebody's work, that's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to ride their coattails, I'm not clout chasing. I do all of my own original research for these videos, and I consult sources that disagree with me or sources that are popular as well, just because I want to see, alright, how'd they do? Did they catch something I didn't? Is there a reason to worry about the popular narrative? It's not an attack on these people as individuals. All of that said, this book has credibility issues. While Unsolved Disappearances does have a bibliography, it does not contain endnotes, footnotes, or even inline citations. And on top of that, reading the bibliography itself, Baldwin doesn't cite specific issues of archival documents, but rather the entire archive that she's using. As I said in the Ramsey video, this makes it functionally impossible to verify anything that she's written, especially since one citation in the bibliography literally reads, numerous internet websites. That chapter on Abe Ramsey, which refers to the missing child as Abraham Carroll Ramsey, when all contemporary reports name him as Abraham Lincoln Ramsey, also gets the story wrong in basically every single way. To quickly recap, Baldwin claimed that the family dog Motley ran into the woods after hearing other dogs barking, and that several hours later, 3-year-old Abe went off into the woods to look for the dog. In reality, there was no dog named Motley, and Abe went missing after he tried to follow his siblings to a store. She also claimed that this fictional dog was found injured under the porch, which, again, entirely fabricated. Following this, Baldwin says that around 4 p.m., the rest of the Ramsey children arrived home from school and were immediately sent out to look for Abe, but they too failed to locate the child. Quick reminder, they weren't at school, they were at the store. Baldwin continues the story by saying that when Abe's moonshining father, John Ramsey, who also pretended to run a mill as a day job, returned home that afternoon, he too searched for his son miles into the forest, but it was to no avail. She also claims that decades later, another moonshiner, or perhaps John Ramsey himself, confessed on his deathbed to having shot Abraham Lincoln Ramsey and then burying him inside of one of the mash barrels underground. Allegedly, this occurred because the moonshiners were up at the still, heard something trudging through the forest, called out asking for the password, and then, hearing nothing, shot randomly into the woods. I did go into some more detail about this in the Abe Ramsey video itself. I just want to give you a summary version to move on quickly. I bring this up because, as you might be anticipating, there is absolutely no evidence that John Ramsey was involved in the moonshine industry.
Already
And
committed.
there's also no evidence, no documentation of this alleged shooting and the alleged confession of a man who mistook a 3-year-old boy for a federal liquor agent. If you're wondering why I'm so frustrated about this specific case, it's because the real story was not particularly difficult to find. It was published in multiple newspapers on March 27th, 28th, and 31st of 1919, and the first of which, published in the Tennessean, bears the headline, "Mystery Solved as Body of Lost Child is Found." According to the author of that article, the body of Abraham Lincoln Ramsey was found in a hollow log in a dense forest about 3 miles from his home. It was thought the boy had crawled into the log to seek shelter and then had died there either of exposure or hunger. In my opinion, something like a spider bite would also be possible because it would be difficult to find after 2 weeks of decomposition. The Abe Ramsey section isn't the only one in Juanita Baldwin's book that has what appeared to be fabrications in it. Unsolved Disappearances also covers the disappearances of Trenny Gibson and Dennis Martin. I didn't want to make this video entirely about dunking on another researcher's work, but I felt it was my responsibility to put this out there given how ubiquitous the Baldwin version of this story is. Now that said, it is still weird as all hell. Looking over the evidence, there's really only a few possibilities here. She may have been a victim of foul play, and there are 2 possible ways that could have happened. One of them is that she could have been kidnapped upon reaching the parking lot. That, of course, begs the question of, nobody ever received a ransom letter, and in the trafficking industry, 58-year-old women are not exactly a common target. Another possibility could be that someone who was local to the area, perhaps involved in the drug.
Okay.
Another possibility could be that someone who was local to the area, perhaps involved in the drug trade or just a petty criminal, saw her hiking, saw that she had on a diamond watch band and several diamond rings, and thought, hey, I will rob this person. If this is what happened, it is unlikely yet possible that she could have died as a result of this encounter, and that whoever was the perpetrator, carried her off somewhere. In that circumstance, I think what was brought up about the bear actually is a little bit more relevant, because Polly was not a small woman. She was, again, 5'10", 5'11", and 170 to 180 pounds. Even just carrying that along a simple level trail is going to be difficult. Carrying that much weight across this landscape, damn near impossible for your average person. In an isolated incident, I could see why somebody might go to the conclusion of a certain, big-footed type of creature, but there's no evidence of that kind of thing in this area. we've looked at a lot of these cases so far, and not once has
Alright,
Bigfoot
we'll do
been
the
a
side.
reasonable conclusion. And I'm not even saying that from the position of like saying Bigfoot doesn't exist. I'm just saying if Bigfoot exists, he's not here. Now the tree people, that's another question, another thing for another time. You know what? No. The tree people is a thing for right now. Back when we were down in Tennessee a couple of years ago, riding around with Wendigo in this specific park, he was telling us about some of the folklore of the area, some stories that his grandfather had told him. One of them was about the tree men or the tree knockers, who were people or people-like creatures that lived out in the woods of the Smoky Mountains long ago. This is not in the last 20 years. We're talking about the early 1900s. Now, these tree men obviously lived out in the woods, but the reason they were called tree knockers was because in the presence of humans like us, they would communicate by knocking on trees. We were told that these tree knockers are neither evil nor good. They just kind of live out in the woods, and depending on the story you're looking at, some people never see them. Some people do encounter them. Some people are attacked. Some people are helped. It's not dissimilar from the stories you hear about certain kinds of fae over in Europe, specifically the British Isles, which makes sense because the Appalachian region was settled primarily by Celtic folks. And of course, if we are to play the little game of, could this be real? Well, the Appalachians were once part of the same mountain range as those in the Highlands of Scotland. So if these fae folk really do live underground and travel through the other world, well, would make sense that there's an other world in the Appalachians too. If I can remember which video it was, and I can remember to actually do this, then I will put a link in the description to a video where we talked about the history of this region, the Cherokee, the Celtic influence, all of that, because personally I think it's interesting. Suffice to say, my point here is that if there's a paranormal explanation, I would lean towards the tree knockers. We also just recently went on a trip to Alaska, and one of the girls who came along was from the Smoky Mountains, specifically Great Smoky Mountains National Park, lives basically in the park. And she, when we brought this up kind of, half jokingly, she was like, oh no, that's a thing, there are forest people. There are people that just live in the woods. We're going to try and talk about that more extensively with her when we actually go down to the park in a couple of months to do the meta-analysis video on site, so I will bring you more information on that then. If you are watching this video sometime after November of 2024, it's up! Anyway, those are the options for if something else caused her to disappear. Another possibility would be that it was a wild animal that ran her off trail, but like we said, she was pretty unhealthy. She was a smoker, probably wasn't going to run all that far, especially in this kind of terrain. So it seems more likely than not that the dogs would have scented her body. Also, people running in terror from a bear typically aren't, watching their steps, so there probably would have been tracks. Looking at the other main possibility, which was that she intended to disappear, that's certainly a more believable one. You don't need the stuff that was in Juanita Baldwin's book to be accurate in order for that to be true. The stuff she wrote about definitely builds a stronger case if we trust that she's not making it up, but we can't trust that. The question I would have in that circumstance is simply, why? What's the point? Why disappear? If she was tired of her life, tired of having a husband who was 20 years older than her, and going and spending all of her summers at a campground she loved with her closest friends, and she wanted to escape, well, if it was all about the husband aspect of it and not wanting to go through with the whole divorce process, he was suffering from a heart condition. He was 78 years old. It's morbid to say it, but she could have waited it out. In addition to that, not only was her husband a part owner of this campground, but also her father was a part owner of this campground, her 89-year-old father. If both of those men passed away, she stood to inherit a good amount of estate, if not money. So if the issue here was that she didn't like her life as it was, she could have waited a few more years and would have been in a much better position than somebody who disappears at the age of 58 and just starts over completely. It would also mean that she never again contacted a single family member, that she just into thin air, gone, without a single care about these people, who, so far as I can tell from the reports, she did love. It's not like she was estranged from her family, and you would think that somebody wouldn't, just vanish completely without telling their ailing father that they're disappearing, without saying goodbye to the man. Of course, all of these are assumptions, but in this case, all we have to work on is assumptions. And I will preface this part by saying there is absolutely zero evidence of this. But one other possibility I could see is that her sister had something to do with it because she wanted to be the sole inheritor. But like I said, there's really nothing to support that. It's just something that, pops into my head as a possible
You know, I'm so glad you're checking out EQ Bank. Free withdrawals at any ATM in Canada. Just think of all the money you're paying on ATM fees.
Get a bonus for referring a friend, don't you?
Maybe. Do you have my email? I'll put the email. Put it in.
This person once said, if you're going to miss 100% of the shots, you don't take.
You talk when everybody's hitting. You mind? The Ultra Hold Challenge is back. Choose your ball at MichelobUltraHold.ca.
It's just something that, pops into my head as a possible intrigue. Last possible thing I can think of is witness protection, but why? Just why? There's just no reason, nothing suggesting she would have gone into witness protection. It's just not there. So looking through everything, what's strange about this case isn't necessarily that there's a whole bunch of really weird things that happened. It's that nothing weird happened. That the only weird thing that happened here is she disappeared. Everything else about this entire situation is as normal as it gets. And in a way, everything being so normal is what makes this so strange, because it's not often that we get through the research process on one of these cases and I'm like, yeah, I have absolutely no idea what could have happened here. And in this case, I have absolutely no idea what happened here. There's not a single likely explanation. There's just a series of unlikely explanations that are slightly more likely than each other. All I can think is that maybe this will be elucidated a little bit more when we actually get down there to Deep Creek, when we look around ourselves. I'll try and interview some people, some rangers, see if I can corroborate anything Juanita Baldwin said, see if I can officially debunk anything she said, and, maybe as we're walking along that trail, we'll be like, oh, well, that's a weird little spot, maybe she's in there, and who knows, but at the moment, I'm at a loss. I don't know. Aiden, what do you think?
I'm captivated by your use of the word, I think it was elucidated?
That's what you took away from this?
Really just slipped that in there thinking nobody was going to notice, but I am impressed.
Yeah,
I'm thoroughly impressed.
For somebody who never took the SAT, I did remember a lot of the SAT words. What I was asking you was, what do you think, having heard this? Anyway, Aiden said he thinks that my conclusion seems most likely, which makes me question if he was watching because I didn't have one.
Your conclusion being the lack of clear conclusions.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, so we're on the same page.
No, there are so many different options that are given without any even remotely concrete evidence to one being the more likely option.
Yeah,
so, it's up in the air.
Why did all the cars decide to start going right now?
They really didn't want me to talk to them.
I guess so. They were like, no, your place is behind the camera.
I was on the last episode too much.
Far too much. We had the little booty wiggle, and I think the internet just decided no more.
Yeah.
That was my fault. I filmed that. Not intentionally, it just kind of happened. If you want to support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can subscribe to us here on YouTube or on Patreon for just $1 a month. That helps us fund the channel, helps us grow, helps us improve things. You also get access to a very fun little Liquored Lore episode every month. That's where Aiden and I get a little silly and talk about something that happened. If you would like to support us in a more material way, I should say if you don't want to support us, that's perfectly fine too. I mean, you do you. If you do want to, however, a more material way you can do that is by buying this shirt or one of the other one of the other 3 shirts we have available at bunkerbranding.com. They are all very comfy. They are made right here in the United States of America, and they were designed by Americans. So it is a brand you can really feel good about supporting. If you would prefer to, drink the lodge rather than wear it, you can do so by going to TableauRoastingCo.com, clicking on the Collaborations tab, and buying our coffee, Mount Pocono Perk. I designed it myself. I was a barista at an artisan roastery. I actually did choose the specific coffees and the specific roast temperatures. This was not me grabbing a random coffee off of a digital shelf and slapping our branding on it. One of the best ways to keep updated on everything that's going on here, be aware of, things like our Trova Trip adventure that we went on recently, new releases in the Bunker Branding store, and other just general new stuff about this channel. The best way to do that is by joining our Discord at bit.ly/jointhelodge. That is one of the better ways to get more Lodge, but other ways to get more Lodge would be to watch our podcast. It is live at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights. That is the new time slot, Monday nights. Every single week, unless there's a reason it's not. But we are pretty good about letting you know when that's going to happen. If you can't catch it live, then of course it's right here on YouTube as a video on demand, and we also pop these up on every single podcast platform.
Guts are still coming out.
Just head over to there, look up the Lore Lodge, and you will find it. We also have more channels. We have the Weird Bible, where we sit down with Lendagoon approximately once a month if we're lucky, and we talk about just supernatural aspects of the Bible, crazy stories, Just fun stuff about religion. It is a Bible show for people who are interested in learning about the Bible. It's not a Bible show for Christians. It's not a Bible show for atheists. It's a Bible show for people who are interested in the Bible. We also have the History Hut. We have had that channel for a little while. It has a few videos on it. We're working on bringing a hardcore sit-down recorded podcast over there. That is in the works and hopefully is coming in the new year. And finally, the last of the channels we have that has content consistently going up on it is my personal channel, Aiden Mattis, at the Aiden Mattis here on YouTube. That's mostly gaming streams at the moment. Sometimes we do music, sometimes we do commentary and reaction. It typically is a Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., but that's not quite as concrete. But Friday is almost always a go. In addition to those channels that are hosted by us particularly, we have two other ones, Off the Record and Boozy Mixologist. As you might expect, those are a music channel and a music commentary channel, I should say, and then also a mixology channel, bartending. Luke Eccles, the Off the Record guy, he's going to talk to you about the stories of bands, music news, things like that. Whereas Celso, our guy over at Boozy Mixologist, he sits down and he teaches you how to make drinks, tells you the story of how something came to be, why a cocktail was popular, and general stuff like that. I think that just about wraps everything up. I want to thank Rocket Money again for sponsoring this video, and I will see all of you guys on the next one. I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lord Lunch.
Not as big as I was hoping, but it might be just enough.
Live from downtown. It's a monster!
No, it's a pony.
Lunchables, now back in Canada.
Advil plus acetaminophen. Ibuprofen targets pain. Acetaminophen blocks pain signals.
Oh, what? Huh?
I gotta scan you.
Oh,
Scan complete.
I'm getting scanned.
Quick lobotomy.
Yeah. Do you see that mountain on the planet?
Yeah.
That's a city.
That's the
I wouldn't like to live there.
Where is it?
Oh, don't
Where's the yellow horns?
Man experience emotions.
Doctor, I don't know why.
What do you know about Archmagos Nozick's research?
Yeah, so the Mechanicus is from Mars.
Oh, okay.
The only reason they didn't get folded into the Empire like every other planet that the Imperium reached is because the only other planet the Emperor conquered at that point was Earth, and Mars had hands, so he signed a peace treaty with them.
Understand.
Everyone else gets the boot. Only the Mechanicum has managed to get the carrot.
That's good for them.
Yeah, it's good for
Yeah,
them.
fuck. I hate this.
So Mark's
Oh, you got more left.
Has better accuracy.
Oh, wait. I have the Mark
Slightly worse. Reloading speed.
I'm not in the mood for anything tonight.
Interesting. So the Marksman Bolt Carbine seems like it's better than.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I got this one in the multiplayer,
Right.
and I liked it. It's good.
It seems better than the Bolt Rifle. Yeah, it looks
It's weird, 'cause
solid.
it's technically
You do the thing, and probably
I
done
wish I could
with it.
change my special ability.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Like, the characters in campaign can't, but I'd
Yeah.
love to do the operations because we unlocked the power sword.
The what?
Did we? I
Yeah,
didn't
the power, not the power hammer, the power sword. It's good.
Alright, so.
Stick it in there, stir the brains.
Slightly better. Chainsword has critical stuff that this
Oh
doesn't
no,
have.
but the power sword has like a dueling mode and then an AOE mode. I'd say just have fun with it.
Alright, I'll try it.
Basically, you switch modes by doing the heavy attack. Everything else is just timing your light attacks.
Gotcha.
So you technically don't have a heavy attack.
Got it. Okay, I see.
Yeah, but the weapon, it doesn't matter.
Let's go. Ugh. Only 5 viewers away from 400, boys. We can do it. I don't know how to describe it. These guys got some swagger when they walk.
Oh, yeah.
They walk like they're heavy.
Yeah.
I think it's funny that you, like, can just walk into each other.
Walk through. Brother, I'm phasing.
Oh, do a Black Rose load it goes in 1 to the 2000. Everything sucks here. You want to see? You want bad? See what the Drukari
I'm disappointed in myself. I want to do better stuff than this,
What am I
and
supposed to look up? What
can't
did the
even seem to get out of my way to do this.
Drukari will turn you into a couch that can't die.
What?
Yeah.
For what
They're
purpose?
fucked up. So the Drukari are a splinter of the Eldar faction. And basically the Eldar fucked a god into existence. I'm summarizing. But so the rest of the Eldar live in fear of basically the god that fucked into existence. But the Drukari figured out, hey, if we just torture people, it like fends off the god. Like it like protects their soul and like sates the appetite of that very hungry, very horny god.
When you say fucked into existence,
It means that the entire species and like the planet just kind of devolved into pleasure cults. And once they stopped having fun fucking each other, they started stabbing each other, and then stabbing other people, and then fucking stabbing other people. And that's what the
Everybody's got to have a hobby.
Come on.
Yeah, everybody's got to have a hobby.
Oh, okay. So it's
I'm
not
not in the
actually
mood for this
scope.
tonight.
It says it's
No.
scope, but it's not
No, it
actually.
doesn't have an actual scope, but it's just really active. Also, Aiden, look at this big old castle.
Yeah, so I don't like that. I mean, it's pretty. It's very cathedral-esque, but I don't like tall things.
Oh.
Might be done for the night. I'm really not in the mood for this.
Yeah?
Why'd I use that?
Imagine you kind of want to call up things on the goose fashion.
You bastard.
You walked right into that.
yeah,
Like,
Peach, shut the fuck up.
yeah, short stuff.
Alright, where are we going?
oh, we're going this way. Wait, what?
Whoa. Oh. I like this sword.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sword, Oculus Bolt Carbine. What did I have?
Oculus Bolt Carbine is
Right.
the one.
I'm hungry.
What
That's
is
right here.
I have a plasma pistol, which I'm not.
Oh, how'd you know the plasma pistol?
I don't know.
Oh, it did default to it for some reason.
Oh, okay. I mean, probably just to make sure we run with it at one point. So one of the classes you can play in the multiplayer mode in just has a shield and a sword, so you just block and stab. Like,
That's
stuff
fine.
like that. But, yeah, no, there's like just melee classes.
Okay, RB.
Controls are off.
Combo. That's against Swarm.
What's for the lieutenants?
Okay, so 4 is the power combo. 4 is the speed combo. Ah!
sword.
Hey man, just being three dudes with swords is the way to go.
Yeah.
Maybe bolt missile here, Sean.
Weapon up.
Ooh, my hero. My god. Don't worry, baby, I'm coming over.
I don't totally understand the controls when it comes to the combos.
Honestly, I never get combos off because I'm too busy blocking.
It's like, what,
Just
1, 2,
stab and block.
Oh! 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, so it's once one attack. Gotcha. Alright, I'm starting to get the hang of this.
Every weapon has a learning curve, but you got it. Alright, yeah, let's just swing our swords around.
Hey, you know,
We'll play with the combos. Boys and their boys.
exactly.
Alright. Hello. Somebody's there. Probably not. Thanks for stopping by. We're just making some monsters. Let's try this one.
From the studio that brought you How to Train Your Dragon
I don't know if I can watch that.
and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish comes the greatest DreamWorks movie ever. The Wild Robot is the best animated movie of the year. And one of the best movies, period.
Do you need assistance?
I want you to see. I want you to see. Me.
I do not have the programming to be a mother.
They all need to eat, but yours needs to swim and fly.
He's a run. His chances aren't super good.
What happened to the yellow horns I had?
Find that inside you.
You should work on that.
Don't be afraid.
Ready? I could use a boost.
You are ordered to return home.
Are those your parents?
I am already home. Sometimes, to survive, you must become more than you were programmed to be. I am a wild robot.
If you're really interested in higher interest, sign up today to earn high interest savings with EQ.
In Happy Valley, Pennsylvania, we lose to Ohio State basically every year. But in Happy Valley, Tennessee, in 2008, they lost Mike Kieran. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge.
Alright, let's see now.
In 2008, Marysville, Tennessee resident Mike Kieran went down to his property in Happy Valley, Tennessee, just west of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Mike was the proud father and the employer of both of his sons, Matt and Andy Kieran, who were in their early to mid-20s in 2008. And though Mike had been divorced from the mother of his children for 7 years at this point, as far as I can tell, the relationship between the two of them was amicable. Now, as I said, Mike had two properties. One was a condo in Marysville, where he owned a construction company, building homes and houses and the like. And then on the weekends, he would head down to his second property near the family's farm, down in Happy Valley, where he had property that was essentially next to his parents. Mike was really big on the outdoors. He loved hiking, fishing,
She's small.
camping, all of
I think
it,
the other
especially
one-
riding his ATV around the various trails in the area. So on weekends, he would often head down to that property. He would grab his ATV, he would go off exploring, and that's precisely what he seems to have been doing on the weekend of August 23rd, 2008. But when Mike took his ATV down Bell Branch Road that day and waved to his neighbor Grady Whitehead, that was the last time anyone would see Mike alive. In fact, that appears to be the last time anyone has ever acknowledged seeing Mike. And one important thing to note here is that this isn't your standard missing persons case that happens in any given small town. This isn't the Midwest where you've got, rivers and fields and some forests and whatnot. This is the mountains of Tennessee. This is the Great Smokies. This is Appalachia. And the Great Smoky Mountains and the Appalachian Range as a whole, well, those are older than the trees. And that's not just a cute little line from a song. That's a legitimate fact about how old this formation is. When the Appalachian Mountains first began to form hundreds of millions of years ago, there were not yet trees. Now, back in the days of Pangea, when all the continents lived together in harmony, before the fire continent attacked, the region wasn't just the Appalachians. It wasn't just part of North America. It extended all the way from Scotland down to the Little Atlas mountain range in modern-day Morocco. So this mountain range is literally older than the continents as you know them. Now, of course, Pangea broke up like 270 million years ago, so it's been a while, and humans have only been in specifically the Great Smoky Mountain region for at least the last 12,000 years. Now, I say at least because for a while we thought that the Clovis culture was first, and the Clovis culture was based off of some spear and arrowheads they found in New Mexico, and they were like, oh, the first Americans. And then other people were like, well, we kind of think some of this stuff looks older, and the general archaeological community was like, no, the oldest Americans. And then back in 2022, like a year ago, that was just roundly and permanently debunked. We know it's longer than that now. But my point in saying that was that the human history of this region extends thousands of years. At least 12,000, possibly 25,000 or more. And as a result, there's a lot of legends about what lurks in those trees, some of which go back before recorded history. In fact, many of which go back before recorded history. And the reason I bring that up, this idea of stuff going back beyond recorded history, is that even the people that the first settlers to reach the eastern side of the Appalachians encountered, the Cherokee, those were not the first people there. They probably migrated to the region from the Great Lakes sometime before 1540, possibly driven there by war with the more powerful Iroquois Five Nations, also known as the Haudenosaunee. Not all Iroquoian-speaking peoples, like the Cherokee and the Erie, were involved in the Five Nations, which included groups like the Mohawk. And despite that shared culture and language, and probably religion as well, these smaller Iroquoian groups who weren't part of the Five Nations Confederacy were often victims of the Five Nations Confederacy. Despite this, both the Five Nations and the Cherokee would ally with the British in 1776. But prior to the arrival of the Cherokee, whether they were driven there by warfare or simply looking for new horizons, this was the hunting ground. This was part of the, I don't know if you necessarily call it claimed land, but this was part of the territory known to the Mississippian culture. And more specifically, this would probably have been within the realm of the chiefdom of Chiapa. Unlike their Cherokee successors, the Mississippians who lived in this area likely spoke a Muskogean language called Coasati, which is still spoken by about 400 people in Louisiana today. Some of the more modern Muskogean tribes that you might be more familiar with would be groups like the Alabama, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw. That's not the only ones, but they are some of the more recognizable. And I would have talked about the Muskogean peoples, except we already talked about them in our Chris Tompkins video. So now you're not just getting Native American history, you're actually getting Native American prehistory, which was a bold choice on my part. But as for this larger Mississippian culture, that spread basically along the entirety of the Mississippi River, and it lasted from about 900 AD to 1600 AD. To give you an idea of that on a European timescale, when the Mississippian culture was on its ascension, the Vikings had just invaded England, and England was not yet England. By the time the Mississippian culture was on its way out, the English were colonizing America. So they were there for a very long period of time. And part of the reason that we even know about these people today, besides scattered documentation from Europeans and their linguistic descendants, is this mound building practice that they had, When you see things like Cahokia, that's a Mississippian mound building site. And that's kind of what set the Mississippian culture apart from a lot of the other cultures of North America. This practice...
Only the one person that people support is fit to be king.
Where do I put the ribs?
The fully electric Subaru Solterra joins the Subaru family. Solterra has all of the benefits of an electric vehicle in the uncompromising package of an SUV. With up to 820 liters of cargo space,
this side.
an available power
You do cut into the
rear
cutie mark a bit.
and up to 3,530
I'll
liters
change it.
of total interior volume with generous legroom for all passengers. With two electric motors producing 250
What am I watching? I don't care.
248 pound-feet of torque, you get plenty of good, clean...
Thank you.
That's kind of what set
Stop off! Are you okay? God damn it, I was watching that shit. No, back. That one. Thank you.
So they were there for a very long period of time. And part of the reason that we even know about these people today, besides scattered documentation from Europeans and their linguistic descendants, is this mound building practice that they had. When you see things like Cahokia, that's a Mississippian mound building site. And that's kind of what set the Mississippian culture apart from a lot of the other cultures of North America. The practice of building mounds, and atop those mounds they would place structures, houses, temples, burial structures. But it also wouldn't be fair to consider the Mississippian culture the same kind of thing as the Cherokee or the Iroquois. This was not a single tribe or nation, this was a variety of tribes and nations that all shared cultural characteristics. That included people who spoke Muskogean, Caddoan, Siouan, and Natchez languages. Now, the Natchez probably can have their own video because that's a weird story. It's a language isolate. We don't know where they came from. We don't know when they came from. So, interesting group there, but something else to talk about. They've also been suggested to be an offshoot Aztec group that went east instead of south. Like, it's probably not that. But anyway, point is, the Natchez, really interesting. We'll probably get into that at a different time. Right now, we're focused on this. These shared cultural traits developed in three archaeologically distinct phases. The early Mississippian period, from about 900 AD to 1200 AD, was a time of transition. Tribes moved from small, independent villages to larger, bustling towns that were beginning to see social stratification. It also saw the development of large-scale agriculture, and agriculture does something cool. You need a lot fewer people to produce food for a lot more people. And when you have more food and fewer hands needed to create that food, you have time for cool things like artisanship, permanent architecture, and shell-tempered pottery. And of course, once you've got the shell-tempered pottery, well, you gotta see if the grass is still greener on the other side. This leads us into the Middle Mississippian, which is sort of the golden age of this culture, lasting from 1200 to 1400 AD. This is where we see the rise of centrally controlled chiefdoms and the development of a sort of organized religion. The building of the aforementioned famed city of Cahokia was a manifestation of these cultural changes. And at its peak, Cahokia had over 120 mounds, all of which had at least one structure on them, covering an area of 6 square miles and comprising a population of 40,000 people. Now, that may not seem like a huge number of people, but that's about the same size as London in 1300.
Fucking whore, cocksucking fucking bastard.
What would become the United States to surpass that
Fuck
population number was Philadelphia in 1780. Now that said, it does
I'm
pale
fine.
in comparison to the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, which of course had about 200,000 to 400,000 people. In this period, they also developed trade connections as far west as the Rocky Mountains, and started to get into the early stages of metallurgy. They weren't yet forging anything or casting it, they weren't really doing the whole smelting process quite yet, but they were using copper and they were fortifying it through the process of annealing. What that means is that you would heat the copper to a desired temperature, you would hold it there for a little while, and then you would allow it to slowly cool, which would make the metal more flexible and less brittle. After that, they would then stretch, hammer, bend, whatever they needed to do with the metal to get it into the desired shape. Unfortunately, for reasons that still aren't totally clear to archaeologists, around 1400, the Mississippian culture began to go into decline. What we do know is that this period is right after the Little Ice Age, which was devastating for Europe. Climate change on that scale caused scarcity of resources, it caused wars over those resources, and it's very likely that this had a lot to do with the Mississippian cultural collapse. We just don't have the full story because nobody was writing it down. Or if somebody was writing it down, we have lost those writings, and whatever script they were writing in. But all of that, whether it was the wars or the climate change or whatever that caused the decline, it was really the nail in the coffin when the Spanish showed up in 1540 and unwittingly brought with them a lot of deadly European diseases to which only they were immune. And while Hernando may have been a complete disaster for the Mississippian culture, it was invaluable to historians because it is the only written documentation we have about any of the Mississippian chiefdoms that was written during a time period when they still existed. As for what happened to the Mississippians, it's not necessarily believed that they were wiped out or died off, but rather that as their own population dwindled and as they were no longer able to sustain the infrastructure they've created, they sort of melted away into the tribes we know today that speak these Muskogean, Caddoan, Siouan languages. In the ensuing centuries, Europeans arrived and pushed the natives further west through a combination of wars, treaties, and just outright purchases. In the early 1800s, American settlers began to go west of the Appalachians in large numbers. They founded a number of little frontier villages, and one of those was Happy Valley. It was known as Ray's Valley after the man who settled it for the first 40 years, and then was renamed to Happy Valley after the Civil War. And it's actually the reason that this case caught my eye was I saw Happy Valley, and I thought, is this a local case? Is this Pennsylvania? How did I miss that? It's not. It's Happy Valley, Tennessee, not Happy Valley as in State College. My Happy Valley was home to about 50,000 people, but Mike Kieran's Happy Valley was home to only about 500. One less since he went missing 15 years ago, and absolutely nobody knows what happened. On the morning of Saturday, August 23rd, 2008, 51-year-old Mike Kieran called his son Andy to let him know that he would be driving to his Marysville home to pick up and borrow his son's lawnmower. The reason he was doing this was because he was going to be driving down to the property in Happy Valley, Tennessee, to be mowing some of the property. And as I said before, this property that he had, this farmhouse and barn, and what appears to be a very, very large amount of woods, was at the end of Bell Branch Road. There is only one way onto Bell Branch Road, and it is off of Happy Valley Road, and there are only two ways out of Happy Valley, both of which are also along Happy Valley Road. One heads north towards Maryville, the other heads south towards Tallahassee. The point in telling you this is to kind of give you the picture here. This is a pretty secluded area, and Mike's property was...
Oysters, mussels, and lobster take center stage during this 4-day celebration of PEI's famous shellfish in Charlottetown. The PEI International Shellfish Festival, September 19th to 22nd. Tickets at PEIshellfish.com.
What's happening over here? Can we hear you? Let's see what's happening.
His property was in a secluded part of that secluded area. Now, of course, his parents lived right next door, his brother lived quite nearby, and Grady Whitehead, who lived across the street from his parents, from what I can tell, had known Mike since he was an infant. So while Mike might have been far from civilization, he wasn't really far from help. He wasn't far from people who cared about him. But there was also not a ton of reason to worry about Mike. He was in great shape for 51 at 5'10 and just 185 pounds. He still had a full head of dark brown hair, and he had hazel eyes and a brown goatee. Mike was also a pretty identifiable guy if you got a good look at him. He had several distinctive scars in a few different places on his body, a tattoo, a chipped tooth, and his feet were a size and a half different from each other. And Mike wasn't known for abusing drugs or alcohol. He was a pretty outdoorsy guy. He seemed to care about his fitness. And most importantly, he had grown up in this area. He knew those woods, he knew the park like the back of his hand. On the morning that he went missing, he passed his son Andy on the road at about 10 a.m. He had his pickup, his trailer attached to his pickup, and on the trailer was Andy's mower. After picking it up, he headed back onto the highway and went south back towards Happy Valley. When he got there, he parked the truck and the mower at the end of his driveway, headed back to the house, hopped on his ATV, and went out for a drive. As he was leaving, he waved to his neighbor, Grady Whitehead, much as he did every weekend, and then he headed off on his way. Nothing appeared to be wrong. And Grady was a pretty reliable source here. He had known Mike since Mike was born, and both his own son, Mike Whitehead, and Mike Kieran were good friends. The elder Whitehead, now in his 80s, had also been a national park ranger from 1955 to 1988, right there in the Great Smoky Mountains. Now on that morning, Mike Kieran hadn't told anybody where he was going on his ATV, but that wasn't particularly unusual. Mike knew the area like the back of his hand. He took his ATV out all the time. He always came home. So there was just nothing to really think about here. And of course, you may be wondering what kind of exploring we're talking about here. Well, Mike hiked, he explored the rivers and streams, and he even would sometimes go into caves alone, which you really shouldn't do. But he would do it, and he would come back. After waving to Grady Whitehead, nobody heard from Mike for the rest of the day, but again, he was an adult man, his kids were grown up, his parents were obviously grown up, so it wasn't a huge issue. It was the next day that people began to maybe worry, because nobody heard from Mike on Sunday morning. I wasn't able to determine if Mike was the type of guy who went to church every Sunday, but something caused his parents to feel a twinge of suspicion that something might be wrong, because either his mother or his brother, accounts seem to differ on this, walked over to his house on Sunday. You know, what they saw was, oh, well, his pickup's still there, and his ATV is still there, so he must be home. Maybe he's just having a bad day. You know, maybe it's no big deal. But nonetheless, it appears that either Andy or Matt went to check on their dad's property in Marysville, and he wasn't there either. Despite all of this, his mother was still a little bit worried, but his sons, not so much. Not hearing from their dad for a whole day was a little weird, but whatever, he's their dad. It was only on Monday morning, when it wasn't just that they hadn't heard from Dad, but when they hadn't heard from their boss, that they began to get a little worried. According to Andy and Matt, they always heard from their dad bright and early Monday morning because they needed to know what they were going to be doing for the day. But by 8:30 a.m., just before the start of the workday, they still hadn't heard from their father. So they decided they would call their grandmother and ask. She also hadn't seen their dad, so at that point they decided the best thing that they could do was go check on him themselves. When they arrived, they found the pickup truck still there, the mower still on the trailer, the windows down, and Mike's keys, wallet, and other various possessions inside and undisturbed. There were plenty of rational explanations for why all of that could still be in the car, so they didn't immediately panic. Instead, they walked over to the house, went inside, found it unlocked, and they looked around a little bit. As far as they could tell, nothing appeared off. Everything was in its proper place. It didn't look like there had been any sort of fight. Nothing obvious was missing. So it was weird that he wasn't there and he wasn't in the car. It wasn't weird that he wasn't picking up his phone because Happy Valley had terrible cell reception, but something felt off. So they walked outside and they looked around again. And that's when they realized it. There was an ATV there, but it was their dad's old ATV. He had recently purchased a new one, and that's the one he took out on Saturday morning. Matt and Andy didn't really need to be told that something was wrong here. They could tell. They called the Blount County Sheriff's Office at around 5:30 p.m. on Monday, August 25th, 2008, and within the hour, then Sergeant Mike Surratt was on the property. Now, if you read about this case online, you might see some sources claim that they called the National Park Service first. According to both the Sheriff's Department and the brothers, they called the Sheriff's Department first. They did not report this to the National Park Service first. I think that is important, especially considering the missing 411 stuff and National Park Service conspiracy that somebody mindlessly started. How foolish of them. But yeah, the reason I harp on that point is that the first contact here, so far as both the Sheriff's Office and the brothers say, as far as investigative work goes, was the Sheriff's Office. It's possible that they called the National Park Service to ask if anybody who was familiar with him had seen him in the park that day, but it does not appear that they called the Park Service about the investigation or to report him missing, which would make sense considering he did not go missing in the park, or at least the last time he was seen was not in the park. However, the National Park Service would get involved and help out. Now, despite the quick action in the Sheriff's Department actually getting somebody out there within an hour of the call, we were still several days off from when Mike had gone missing. It wasn't that he was last seen an hour before Sergeant Surratt got there. He was last seen 2 days earlier. So by the time anybody was actually starting to investigate this disappearance, it had already been 54 hours. That kind of delay to a search and rescue operation is critical. To make matters worse, at around 6:30 or 7 p.m., it started raining. Matt, Andy, and Sergeant Surratt did a limited search that night until it got dark, but with the rain and night setting in, there was just no way that they were going to be able to continue that search with any degree of success, let alone the danger they'd be putting themselves in. So it was that the search began in earnest the next morning, Tuesday, August 26th. Around 8:30 a.m., over 100 people gathered to begin the search for Mike Heron. Among them were search and rescue teams from the Sheriff's Office, the National Park Service, the Fire Department, basically every investigative agency in the area who had the manpower and the expertise set somebody out, and on top of that, the community really rallied around this. There were dozens of volunteers. There were a lot more volunteers than there were officials. And one of those volunteers was 80-something-year-old Grady Whitehead. According to Grady's wife, he was the first person out looking every day and he was the last to come home. And aside from the fact that Grady had known Mike his whole life and had a personal stake in this, he had watched this guy grow into a man. He had watched this guy have his own kids. There was another aspect, and it was that Grady was very familiar with search and rescue. He was a master tracker. He had been involved in basically every single rescue operation in Great Smoky Mountains National Park from 1955 to 1988. And if you've been watching our channel for a while, or you're familiar with the Missing 411 phenomenon in general, you'll probably notice some things about those dates. 1955 to 1988 in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Right in the middle of Grady Whitehead's tenure at that park was the Dennis Martin disappearance. And Grady wasn't just a guy who heard about the disappearance of Dennis Martin and the investigation, the search effort. That was a long search effort. Sure, the initial one was only a few weeks, but the actual national park search lasted approximately 90 days. And I will say, that was a very interesting little detail to find in this case, because at no point when researching the disappearance of Dennis Martin did I find that there was an organized search effort beyond, I think, June 25th, 1969. And in case you don't know the Dennis Martin story, to give you the really quick version of it, and also maybe promote one of our other videos that we have, Walking Around the Forest with Wendigoon, the Dennis Martin case is kind of like the Missing 411 case. It's the first one most people hear. It was Father's Day weekend, 1969, June 14th specifically, and Dennis Martin was on a camping trip with the men in his family. This was an annual trip. They all went. His grandfather, his uncles, his dad. Couldn't tell for certain whether the moms were along on the trip, but definitely the dads were. They were on the second day of their weekend, and they hiked the Spence Field, which, having done a chunk of that hike myself, is not as easy as I was expecting, but I was also kind of fat. So now you're going to hear a lot of different versions of this story, depending on which YouTube video you watch or which article you read. I would like to think mine's one of the better ones. If Missing Enigma has one, his is probably better than mine. In fact, I'm almost positive Missing Enigma has one. Please watch mine, but also watch his. To be honest, as far as our Missing 411 videos go, that one's a little silly. The version I have goes like this. Dennis and his older brother Doug were hiding behind a bush to scare their dad when he walked by. Simple little prank. You know, you're just being a little silly, a little goofy. And the problem was, their dad saw them do this, and, you know, because he's a dad, and they were 8 and 6. But when their dad called them in, only Doug came. Now, Dennis's father had watched both his sons hide behind that bush. So he was very confused when only one of them came out. He called for Dennis again, and then, upon realizing that this might just be an issue of his 6-year-old being a pain in the neck, he went to go check, but no Dennis. He immediately started looking around, telling the entire camp that Dennis was missing, and then he himself bolted, I think it was a full mile or two, back down the trail, looking to see if Dennis had headed back the way they came, but there was no Dennis. A search effort was launched that night, and for the next 2 weeks, hundreds of people combed the park looking for Dennis. In fact, there were so many volunteers trying to find Dennis Martin that they had to
I'll be right back.
down the roads and turn people away. Despite that, no solid evidence about where Dennis went. There was a spot at a creek a ways off where they found some footprints that might have matched Dennis. They were child size, but oddly enough, the National Park Service documents on it don't really tell you that much about the footprints. They don't even clarify what kind of shoe they were from. They do say they may have been loafers or tennis shoes, and I'm almost positive they would have been tennis shoes out of the two, because who wears loafers into the woods? One suggested he was wearing loafers, and the other suggested he was wearing tennis shoes. Tennis shoes seem significantly more likely.
Yeah, they're hard to wear loafers up here.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Well,
shut up. Pan back up. This is called drip. It's different. All right, continue.
But it's not just the lack of evidence. It's not just how strange Dennis's disappearance was. They never found him, by the way. But the important part, the part that really gets a lot of people's gears turning here, is who was involved, because it was the National Park Service, it was the Army National Guard, it was the Green Berets. But the Green Berets thing might not be as weird as we think, because that's also where Green Berets train, is the Appalachians. There was a training detachment of Green Berets nearby. Now, part of the weird thing might be that they started involving more and more Green Berets. It was only a couple dozen at first, and I think by the end of it, it was over 70. The Green Berets also seem to have kept their communications separate from everybody else, which might not be super weird considering it is Army Special Forces, but it's also, you know, not the most helpful when you're conducting a search and rescue, but I'm sure there was probably, okay, it's the government, never mind, there might not have been somebody properly communicating. Anyway, the actual weird part is when we stopped getting information about the Green Berets in the National Park Service report, because several days before the search is suspended completely, they just stopped talking about what the Green Berets are up to. They found those footprints, they told everybody those footprints weren't Dennis, and then we stopped hearing what the Green Berets are doing. I'm not saying I know anything about what happened there, but that did strike me as weird when researching it. Again, I think it is Missing Enigma interviewed somebody who was involved in the search, and, you know, has a much more complete version of the story than I do. So I would recommend taking his look at that for that little bit in piece, because I did not know about the interview. He nailed that one. But in the wake of Dennis Martin's disappearance, there were, of course, a number of conspiracy theories. In fact, the Green Beret aspect, the special forces being involved, has been so influential on American media and urban legend that in the American Horror Stories episode, Feral, they basically did the Dennis Martin story, except they swapped Green Berets for Army Rangers. I think it was Army Rangers. It might just have been the National Guard, but I thought it was Army Rangers. Where's the ping pong balls? Conspiracy theories abound. I mean, you know, the national parks are filled with feral people. The national parks are filled with Bigfoot. The national parks have the Wendigo. Teddy Roosevelt created the national parks to hide the Wendigo. Again, who comes up with these things? It did not help that a couple of people did report, and I think it was a couple of people who were together, reported that they thought they saw a large figure carrying something over its shoulder walking on two legs up the mountain. So that's weird. There was also something about a car driving off. That somebody thought they had seen somebody get shoved into it. So there was everything from he was kidnapped by a child predator to he was kidnapped by Bigfoot. In the end, there was no answer. And that's not just relevant because Grady Whitehead was involved in both searches. It's relevant because Dennis Martin disappeared 12 miles east of Mike Heron. Now, that is 12 miles east as the crow flies. We're talking about a region of the United States that is just crumpled up like a piece of paper. There are bridges and valleys and canyons and rivulets and caves. I mean, you cannot really go in a straight line east to west in the Appalachians. But what you can do is get yourself very, very lost, and that's what they were hoping had happened to Mike. It had only been a few days, and it had been raining, so that means fresh water, but it also means cold. Basically, there was a 50-50 chance that Mike was just injured somewhere and still alive. And they were hoping that they would find their dad and maybe he was just injured. Maybe they could help him. And finding him likely was going to start with finding his ATV. Because if what had happened was an ATV accident, he couldn't feasibly be that far from it. So early on that Tuesday morning, they conducted a grid search. For those that don't know, with a grid search, what you do is you take out a map and you assign small lots, usually like a squared yard, to each individual searcher. And then you proceed in a line and you make sure every single grid square is very thoroughly searched. This way you don't leave any stone within the search area unturned. And around midday, that search actually paid off because somebody found the ATV. Now, part of the problem with all of this is that precisely where the ATV was located when they found it appears to be a matter of national security. Official reports only say that it was found about 30 yards off of Happy Valley Loop, which is a road in Happy Valley, and it was a mile from Mike's home. Now, that is not particularly helpful to me because Happy Valley Loop is a fairly long road, and what is about a mile? Is about a mile anywhere between 4/5 of a mile and 6/5 of a mile? Is about a mile within 100 feet, give or take? Or are we talking about like this was 3/4 of a mile away? Because the fact of the matter is, with how long Happy Valley Loop is, if it is 1/4 of a mile, give or take, that could be anywhere along the road. But that's not the whole story about the ATV. You see, according to Matt Heron, he immediately knew something was wrong the moment he saw that ATV. He said that it was parked at an abandoned cabin, up a hill, kind of stashed in a weird spot. Additionally, Sergeant Surratt, who is now a lieutenant, said that it was, quote-unquote, it was just really oddly placed. Specifically, it appears to have been backed into the brush. One news report did say that it was found sideways, but I don't know what that means. What Matt and Andy said was that they didn't think their father would have left the ATV like that, just backed into the brush. And that's part of it. It was backed into the brush, the keys were still in the ignition but switched off, and yet the ignition switch was on. They were certain their father would never have left the ATV in that position because leaving the ignition switch on while having the keys off would drain the battery. He also didn't frequent Happy Valley Loop. He didn't have friends who lived on that road. That road didn't go to anything important. There was no reason for him to be on that road. And this led Matt and Andy to believe that their father didn't disappear. Something had happened to him. And not just he had had an accident, someone had done something to him. This was foul play. And though the search continued, and there was still the hope that they would find Mike somewhere alive, Matt and Andy began to wrap their heads more around the possible criminal angle. The problem with the search continuing was that there was really nothing to go on. There was nothing found at the ATV. They had dogs try to pick up a scent, but they couldn't scent Mike on it. There were no prints, and there were no tracks leading away from it in any direction. It seems that the only tracks they could find were the ones left by the ATV itself, and those didn't go off into the woods or anything. They just were to the road. And according to the Knoxville News-Sentinel, there was nothing to indicate Mike had ever been there. So the opinion of investigators and journalists here doesn't even seem to be that Mike had gone missing from the abandoned cabin. It was that Mike had never been at the abandoned cabin. But there's another issue with the abandoned cabin. When I asked the cops about it, they didn't know what I was talking about. It took a little bit of back and forth, some emails, a few phone calls, but what I was able to dig up is that despite the fact that Matt was positive, he did not, it wasn't like, I think there was a cabin, there was a cabin sort of nearby, it was that ATV was stashed at an abandoned cabin. Not near an abandoned, at an abandoned cabin. And yet the abandoned cabin was not in the police report, according to the Blount County Sheriff's Office. And unfortunately, that's basically all they would share with me. Now, I'm not too conspiratorial about that, because the next day they expanded the search to the entire ridge above Happy Valley Loop on the non-National Park side. And while National Park Service rangers and other deputies were leading searches out in the woods, 3 officials and 14 volunteers on horseback went to where the ATV was found, and they started to fan out and look around there. The fact that they were involving volunteers in the search, even in areas that may have been sensitive regarding the abandoned cabin and the ATV site, leads me to believe that at this point in time, there was nothing that the cops were trying to hide. Also, by this point, they had kind of moved
just like the idea of these giant
horns
in the sky.
Neighborhood. They were even looking at the caves he had frequented, and not going too deep inside, but peeking around, checking the surrounding areas. They were at this point pretty confident Mike wasn't just going to be found out and about on the surface. He was going to be somewhere in the bush, possibly even in a cave. And considering the location of his ATV, there weren't a ton of great spots that could have been. If he was off in the woods injured somewhere, something bad had happened, because somebody had to have stashed that ATV, and it was not Mike. So the likelihood, the hopes that this was just a simple accident were quickly diminishing. And part of the reason that the focus of the search and the way that they were considering this effort, now moving a little bit more towards recovery, even rescue, any reasonable person can look at the ATV situation and the ignition switch being on but the keys being off and still in it and see that that is proof positive of one of two things. Either Mike intended to disappear or it was foul play. And as far as intentional disappearance goes, that was ruled out by other things, and Matt and Andy were adamant that their father would never abandon his family like that. And as far as I can tell, that tracks. Nobody really anticipated that Mike had any desire to leave his life. He owned a business where his two sons worked. He lived close to his family. He was out and about on the weekends, enjoying life. He had property. The guy had displayed no interest in disappearing. He'd also just borrowed his son's lawnmower, and as far as anybody could tell, prior to him disappearing, he was behaving perfectly normally. Foul play just made a lot more sense. Unfortunately, with no developments in the case by Friday afternoon, they suspended the search on August 30th, 2008. And in the years since Mike's disappearance, while his family has not held out hope that they'll still find him alive somewhere, they have continued searching for answers. And going into research case, I was hoping that maybe I could find some, or I could at least get in the right direction. Maybe a new fresh set of eyes external to the case might be able to help. Unfortunately, there's just so little publicly available information, and there may just be so little information that it's impossible to come up with a good conclusion as to what could have happened to Mike. But there are theories. His sons still believe that he was a victim of foul play, though precisely what kind is uncertain. Early on, some people speculated on internet forums that maybe developers wanted his property, and this was an easy, convenient way of making him disappear. Now, the fact that making somebody disappear is neither easy nor convenient notwithstanding, in the ensuing decade and a half, his property has not been sold to developers, so it's doubtful that that's what it was. Also, I didn't find any evidence that developers were trying to get his property after he passed. And while others suggested maybe this was some sort of rivalry, maybe he had enemies who disliked him for some reason, his son said that even in the very competitive home construction business in which they worked, he was well liked by everyone they knew. According to them, their father just had no enemies. And it's possible that they were wrong, but they couldn't even think of somebody who might want to hurt their dad. One possibility is that he came across some illegal activities while he was out riding his ATV, possibly a marijuana farm or an unlicensed moonshine still. And no, I will not be getting into it with anybody about what moonshine is, how licensing for moonshine could possibly work, whether licensed moonshine is real moonshine or not. That's not the point of this video. Perhaps if he had done this and was seen, or maybe spoke up and said something to somebody there, he may have been kidnapped or even killed to keep him quiet. And then others still look to the paranormal to explain this disappearance. There was no scent trail on the ATV, and there were no footprints leading away from it, which led some people to believe that maybe Mike was abducted by aliens. Of course, it had been raining for nearly 24 hours straight by the time they got to the ATV, which would likely explain why the dogs could not pick up a scent. Others still suggest Bigfoot, or more appropriately, the Tree Men of eastern Tennessee. And this has gone by many names. Sometimes they're called the Wild Men of Appalachia, the Tennessee Tree Men, whatever. It changes. The version we're going with here was told to me by Wendigoon. And it was told to me by Wendigoon while we were driving through Great Smoky Mountains National Park, so I felt like this was probably the best folktale to go with. And what I was told is that these guys are tall and they've got patchy hair all over their bodies, and that they live in these secluded, scattered communities throughout the mountains. They're also called tree knockers by some because they communicate by knocking on trees, but that could also be just when humans are around to avoid any verbalizations. And as for their behavior, would the Tree Men capture this man? Well, in some versions of the stories, they are responsible for bringing lost children back to their families. They take care of them, they make sure they get home safe. And in other versions of the stories, they kidnap children.
Feels like a dream, feels like magic. Now I believe I can have it. Ooh, ooh, tell me, all
What do you mean, no signal? Why do you just keep cutting off on me? I'd do the blue if I could.
To avoid any verbalizations. And as for their behavior, you know, would the tree men capture this man? Well, in some versions of the stories, they are responsible for bringing lost children back to their families. They take care of them, they make sure they get home safe. And in other versions of the stories, they kidnap children. According to what Wendigoon told me, it really depended on which one of them you ran into. They could be good or bad, much like human beings, much like normal people. So perhaps someone or something so adept in the forest could move around without leaving a noticeable trail. Problem is, I really strongly doubt they could drive an ATV. So that then brings us back to foul play, which in and of itself is still complicated. There's no simple, neat answer here. Whoever took Mike left no prints, foot or finger, but they must have driven the ATV and then turned it off. Yet whoever stashed it either didn't know that you had to hit the kill switch or it would drain battery, or they had no intention of returning for it. And then there's the weird caginess about where the ATV was found and the abandoned cabin. Now, on the one hand, I get it, this is still an open case, and its department policy does not share sensitive case details with the media. On the other hand, I would have expected there to be more movement or updates in the case if the ATV's location was essential to what was going on, if some sort of criminal activity had been suggested by what they found. And of course, not only is there the fact that the police would not tell me where the ATV was found, but they also said that they had no knowledge of the cabin. So what I really don't get here is why leave the abandoned cabin out of the police report? Matt seemed pretty positive it was there. And why be so cagey about the location of the ATV 15 years later? And if it's a department policy issue, why is department policy to not give any useful information to people after 15 years? I get it. It might be a sensitive case. There might be something going on there. But also, you have failed for 15 years. Let someone else take a crack at it. It is possible that you just do not have the time, energy, and resources that the rest of us do. I mean, think about it. The police in these cases, they've got to deal with the missing person, but they've also got to deal with responding to other criminal calls. They've got to deal with traffic stuff. There's all sorts of stuff going on for the police. They can't dedicate all of their time and energy to just one missing person. But the collective consciousness of the internet certainly can. So, while I'm not angry at the Blount County Sheriff's Office for how they handled this or how cagey they were about certain information, what I would like to say to law enforcement, if any of you are listening, or if any elected officials who have lawmaking power are listening, hey, maybe set a sunset on keeping a lid on everything. Because if the police haven't solved it after 15 years, pretty confident they're not going to without somebody else's help. One good case here, the boy in the box. Why was he identified? Well, he was identified because a completely random person took a DNA test, and then an outside third-party agency flagged it in their system. Sometimes law enforcement needs help, and that's okay, but you gotta let us help you. Because without that information, without knowing where the ATV was, there is absolutely nothing I can do further. I am completely at a loss for what happened to Mike next. And you know, maybe they're also at a loss for what happened to Mike next, but they must have tried all of their ideas, so let me have mine. But with almost nothing to go on, there are really only a few possibilities that I see here. And I will say, the ATV makes me very confident that it was not Bigfoot. Whatever happened to him, it must have involved people who were willing to kill to keep a secret. Some have suggested that this was a drug deal gone bad, but there was no evidence that Mike was using drugs. So we can't really be talking about something super minor here. I'm thinking something big and something that in the region would be relatively common. And what comes to mind is, as I said earlier, marijuana farms and moonshine stills. Back in 2008, both of these things were extremely illegal in Tennessee. So somebody who operated one of these farms or stills If a random guy just drove onto the property and you didn't know where he came from, who he was, or what he would do if he left, you might feel like you had to do something drastic. And to be clear, I'm not justifying what I think happened here. I'm just trying to put you in the mindset of why somebody might kill somebody over something as simple as a moonshine still. In some cases, it might just be that the owners are a little jumpy, but in others, it might be a little bit more calculated. Either way, I feel like what probably happened here was that Mike stumbled across something like this and maybe exchanged words or was spotted and tried to get away. I don't know for certain.
Are you kidding
but
me?
It seems like he got a little too close to something that was going on either on his property, on a relative's property, or on a friend's property, or at the very least, very nearby. Maybe said something about it, or maybe went to go warn them, got caught, and unfortunately was a victim of violence. Whatever happened here, due to the nature of their industry, they probably knew they couldn't just let the guy go, but they probably also didn't know where his home was, and they couldn't just leave the ATV wherever they got him because it was probably near their stuff, so they had to move it, but they didn't know where to put it, so they put it at an abandoned cabin. They backed it into the trees, hoping nobody would see it, or if they did, it would take a while. Or maybe they thought, okay, well, we stash it at this abandoned cabin, and then we come back for it later. But because they didn't hit the kill switch, the battery was dead, so they had to leave it behind. But without knowing where the ATV was found, I'm kind of stuck from there. Because the important part to note here is that they did not find ATV tracks leading into the woods. The only place the ATV could have come from was the road. And there's only 2 roads in and out of Happy Valley. Both of them are the same road, actually. There's just 2 routes in and out. And one goes south and one goes north. So if this ATV was found Happy Valley Loop, it's probably because whoever did this to Mike knew they could not get out of Happy Valley on the main roads during the day without being seen. So where that thing was along Happy Valley Road is actually a crucial detail to anybody investigating this. And by hiding it, by refusing to share that information with the public, all the sheriff's office is doing is hindering anybody who might try to get answers who actually has the time and the resources. And again, I'm not saying this to harp on the sheriff's department, to call them bad people, anything like that. I think they did their jobs to the best of their ability. The problem is, the best of their ability was not the best of anybody's ability. If this information were made public, I'm not saying that it would solve this case, but it would certainly give people a lot more to work with. And if people had a lot more to work with, they might be able to bring this family some closure about what happened to their father, their son, their brother, their ex-husband. You know, like this could be huge for this family, and instead we're sitting here going, oh, well, maybe it was Bigfoot because the police won't share the information. Usually, I love that I can add something to what's already out there on the internet. I don't feel like I did that here. I hope I entertained you nonetheless and taught you something about the Mississippian culture. And maybe there was something that popped up. Maybe you're a Happy Valley local and there was something in this story that jogged your memory of something. I do know there were people on the internet who were like, oh, well, I've heard that Happy Valley has dangerous people in it, but it was kind of at like, oh, I've heard that's a bad neighborhood. It was not specific. It wasn't, this thing happened there in this year and these people did it. No, it was just, you know, oh, I heard you don't go down there. Now, what I would love to do myself is go down there and speak to locals and interview, because I find this to be a very interesting case and one that probably needs outside influence, outside researchers, if it's ever going to reach any sort of conclusion. So if you want to help us to do things like that, to travel across the country and go and do more in-depth stuff on the ground and get to show you the beautiful views of Appalachia, you can support us by subscribing to our Patreon for just $1 a month. It is patreon.com/thelorelodge. You can also join our Discord, which is bit.ly/jointhelodge. That's where you can get all of the updates about everything we're doing. You can also check out our other channels, the History Hut, the Weird Bible, the Lore Lounge, and my personal @TheAidenMattis channel, which is just Aiden Mattis, or youtube.com/@TheAidenMattis here. And that's more live streams, reaction, gaming, stuff like that. If you would like to consume the Lore Lodge physically, we do have coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. It's called Mount Pocono Perk. I designed it myself. It's a great blend. No, it's not just something I put on the shelf. I told Matt I want these coffees, and if you don't give them to me, I'm going to break your kneecaps. If you feel more like wearing the Lore Lodge, we have merch at thelorelodge.shop. You can also drink from us using our mugs. And of course, me and the guy currently behind the camera, whose name is also Aiden, but he's much more blonde and has long hair. He and I do this kind of thing live every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, unless there's a Birds game, in which case we do it at a different time that we decide that weekend, depending on what time the Birds game is. Go.
Yeah. Hello, says 2 watching, but I'm doubtful. Okay, back.
In today's story, the Michigan State Police say there is absolutely zero evidence of foul play. They are wrong. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. On June 11th, 2005, 22-year-old Todd Geib and some friends attended a keg party in Cazenovia, Michigan. Todd rented a room from his cousin in Cazenovia Township, but he worked for Hager Distribution down in Grand Rapids. And you know what else has to do with distribution? Our sponsor and partner today, Factor. Factor absolutely does distribute food to its customers, but the more important part is the kind of food that Factor distributes. Because what it is the kind of thing you'd expect from most restaurants. It does have that level of flavor, it does have that level of quality, and most importantly, there is an entire menu of over 34 options that you can choose from any given week. We love Factor because it takes a lot of the hassle out of the day. Obviously, if I'm going to cook dinner for myself every night, that's going to take 30 minutes of prep, another 15 to eat, and then I've got to clean everything up. So with Factor, instead, I take all of that prep time out of the equation. I don't have to clean a bunch of pots and pans when I don't have time to do it, and I get to eat a delicious and filling meal that also is pretty calorie conscious. And if you're trying to keep some sort of specific diet, maybe high protein, you want to go keto, you're vegetarian, they have options for all of that, and they even tag everything so that it's super easy to find. If you want to try Factor yourself, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code LORELODGE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. And now with the holiday season approaching, you're probably going to spend a lot of time out and about shopping, maybe picking up an extra shift so you can make sure that you have the money to get presents for your loved ones, and you might be looking for a way to take some of that hassle out of those busy days during this season. Factor makes it easy, and most importantly, Factor makes it delicious. Once again, if you want to try Factor for yourself, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code LORELODGE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. And honestly, one of my favorite things about Factor is that it does make a pretty perfect midnight snack, which may be what Todd Geib was going for when he left that party around 12:45 a.m. on June 12th, 2005.
No segue.
Thing is, Todd didn't make it home that night, and he didn't show up the next day either. In fact, he was unfortunately found deceased 3 weeks later in a nearby lake. And yet, despite knowing when he disappeared and seeing where he turned up, the circumstances of his demise simply left more questions for a small town already reeling from this tragedy. And Cazenovia really is a small town. It's more a collection of villages in Cazenovia Township, which has a population of 2,200, of which only 319 live in the actual village of Cazenovia. Cazenovia itself was settled in 1850 by a man named Lot Fulkerson after the land had been ceded to the United States in 1836. Prior to concentrated white settlement of the area, this was the domain of the Ottawa people, who we talked about pretty extensively in our video about Stephen Kabaki. The Algonquin-speaking Ottawa are cousins of Ontario's Ojibwa, as well as southern Michigan's Potawatomi peoples. These three related tribes were all part of the Council of the Three Fires, which was an Algonquin-speaking alliance likely formed around 796 AD. This, of course, was part of the larger Anishinaabe culture, which migrated to the Great Lakes sometime between 2,000 and 1,000 years ago. Along with the Council of the Three Fires, the Anishinaabe culture included several other tribes, like the, and I am going to try my best with these pronunciations, the Mississaugas, the Nipissing, the Algonquin, and the Saulteaux, all of which were, of course, Anishinaabe Algonquin speakers. The Great Lakes were the nucleus of their culture, which stretched from the western side of Ontario near the Alberta border to the western side of Quebec, and then north to south from really middle Ontario down to Illinois and Indiana. Michigan was peopled primarily by the Ottawa in the north, with the Potawatomi in the south, and the Ojibwa just sort of across the lakes from them in Canada. Their culture was based around a very interesting clan system in which each clan had specific roles within the broader tribal structure. There were 7 total, which included the Deer Clan, Eagle, Crane, Turtle, Loon, Bear, and Marten. The Marten is a small mammal, sort of a ground squirrel type thing, and it's actually related to the wolverine. Of course, clan is a European term. In the Algonquin culture, these were called Doden. And each of these 7 clans, which were named after these 7 important animals in the culture, had 7 subclans within it. This meant that you had a total of 49 clans. Now, each clan did not live in its own settlement, as you might expect. There's kind of this idea coming from the more Scottish and Irish structure that you might be more familiar with, where a clan is typically centered around a location, but these clans were centered around responsibilities. However, they were still familial, which meant that intimate relations and marriage was banned within each clan. Kinship was passed through the father's line, but that didn't mean that you couldn't become a part of the tribe if your father was not a member. What it meant is you just had to find a clan that was willing to adopt you. And if you're curious about those governance responsibilities that I talked about, well, I'll go through them for you. The Deer Clan was responsible for the ceremonies, celebrations, and general social aspects of the civilization. Eagle was the academic side. They were responsible for keeping knowledge and passing it down. The Crane Clan was seen as the outside chief, which meant that they handled matters of diplomacy, trade, just anything that was intertribal. The Turtle Clan were both the lawmakers and the justice system, but that didn't mean that they had the total final say in everything. There's basically nothing within this structure that doesn't have some sort of check or balance. For example, if the Turtle Clan wrote and presented a law, then all of the other clans had to agree to it in order for it to pass. And if you didn't like the decision made by a Turtle Clan member regarding justice, you might go to the Loon Clan, who were
Only on Paramount Plus. Stream all 3 Quiet Place movies.
Clan, who were the internal chief and responsible for settling disputes within the tribe. The Bear Clan was sort of the medicinal and spiritual center of things, as well as the protectors of the homeland. And then if you're wondering who the warriors were, well, that was the Marten Clan. And in times when there were no wars and you didn't need warriors, they were usually responsible for hunting and building, which makes sense considering that both of those would be important activities for any war that these people might have been involved in. And depending on which source you're reading, some of them do mention that there was going to be a Thunderbird clan, but that never materialized for a variety of reasons. According to their own oral tradition, the Anishinaabe came from the Dawnlands, which most people have interpreted as being the Atlantic coast to the east. But what's really interesting about this story is why they left the Dawnlands. Because, according to legend, 7 prophets arrived who foretold the coming of the Europeans. Or, perhaps more specifically, who foretold the coming of a light-skinned race. Now, if you go based on genetics, linguistics, and also just their own tradition, it really seems like the place that these people came from was the area that today we call Nova Scotia, Maine, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick. The Anishinaabe were an offshoot group of these tribes who decided that they were going to go west. As the story goes, they were supposed to seek a turtle-shaped island, and there would be turtle-shaped islands both at the beginning and the end of their journey. They were also told that they would stop 7 times along the way before they got to their destination. That light-skinned race that was going to come would either bring prosperity or ruin, and they would know which it would be based on the face that these people wore. And this face would either be the face of brotherhood or the face of death. It also tells of a time when a new people, and this is the word that gets used, is new people, will rise and rekindle the flame of the Anishinaabe culture, at which point the light-skinned race will have a choice to make, and that choice could lead either to great prosperity for the entire world, or it could lead to the destruction of the entire world. So far as I can tell, that last part hasn't come to pass yet, but if the light-skinned race is in fact European Americans, I hope we make the right choice. As I said, archaeological and linguistic evidence points to this journey having occurred sometime between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago, and the Europeans arrived around 1500 AD. Largely, their prophecy seems to have come true. Of course, it is possible that this prophecy is actually them recording their history and retrofitting it to be a prophecy, but that's really not, there's no certainty there. So I don't want to make the argument that that's all this is, when it could very well be that their elders did foretell this, and I don't necessarily think that's impossible. Because, of course, if this happened after 1000 AD, that they made this journey, well, they could have encountered the Vikings, who actually had a settlement in Newfoundland just to the east of where the Anishinaabe claim to have come from. Of course, if this journey happened earlier, and the Council of the Three Fires is dated to about 796 AD by one historian within the Anishinaabe community, and I'm not trying to discredit that work, I'm just pointing out that this is one man's work. And what I'm saying here is not that we should basically question or dismiss any of this as hokey or as, you know, just kind of like backwoods knowledge, folk tales or whatever. No, I'm saying the exact opposite. I think this is an incredibly compelling case that there was earlier contact between Europeans and natives than we thought there was, and that's worth looking into. Because it also suggests that they weren't sure when the Europeans arrived if they were supposed to trust them or not, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a group of people that you've never encountered before, that are just sort of being told to you. So I wouldn't be shocked if these 7 prophets who came to them on the mainland were in fact 7 real human beings who came to the people on the mainland from Newfoundland with this story about the Vikings. Of course, it really does depend on when this happened, but I'm curious, and I hope that we get to look into it more. Now, the nations of the Anishinaabe were at first on pretty good terms with the Europeans. They first allied with the French to fight against the British, and then allied with the British to fight against the Americans in both the Revolution and the War of 1812. This means that they spent 3 generations fighting against American colonists on behalf of the French and English empires, and the thrice victorious Americans were not exactly in a forgiving mood after 1815. The Ojibwa, as well as the Ottawa and the Potawatomi, continued to resist American advancement until they finally signed the Treaty of Washington in 1836, relinquishing those lands to the young American Republic. The Saulteaux, who were actually an Ojibwa offshoot, ended up facing a similar fate and being forced west by American and Canadian expansion. Those not located in the United States, despite sacrificing life and land for their British allies, ended up suffering indignities at the hands of the Proto-Canadians anyway. The Mississaugas sold most of their land to the British in 1781, with the intention of it actually going to the Iroquois, but it didn't go to the Iroquois. The Canadians just granted it to American loyalist settlers who were fleeing a now American country. After signing the Robinson Treaty, the Nipissing were relegated to just a 23 square mile reservation, and that was in 1850. The Algonquin, much like the others located within Canada, faced that same fate of basically having their land taken and given to settlers, despite the fact that it was promised to them by the British government. This was the cause of many of the conflicts between settlers and Native Americans, was the English promising the same land to both groups. That's right, England, if you thought that you were absolved of this because of, the whole independence thing, no, it's still your fault. It's our fault too, but you started it. But it was on former Ottawa or Potawatomi territory that Lot Fulkerson set down that piece of land that would become Casnovia, Michigan. Casnovia coming from the Latin words for house and new, meaning new home. And like any small town, Casnovia today is a very tight-knit community where everybody knows each other, or at least knows of each other. And every summer, on 2 or 3 occasions, the young people of Casnovia Township would gather in an orchard off of White Road. This orchard was just south of Ovid Hall Lake, as well as about a 1/4 mile west of Michigan Route 37. Locally, M37 is also called Newaygo Road. About 100 people would to these parties where everybody would set up a bonfire, sit on the tailgates of their trucks, have some beers, listen to music, and just kind of hang out. These were simple rural country bonfire parties. Now, all of this information comes from a former bartender at the Half Moon Bar and Grill, where Todd Geib was something of a regular. That bar, which was located about a 1/2 mile from Todd's place, is now a U-Haul dealership at 75 Newaygo Road. Now, as for Todd himself, well, he was a younger guy, he was 22, he was in good shape, he enjoyed fishing, he enjoyed being in the outdoors, and from what I can tell, he was generally very well liked. He also didn't work all that far away. Grand Rapids is about a 1/2 hour drive. According to his mother, Kathy, he was like most people his age. He had his ups and downs, but he was doing pretty well. She says that he was fun-loving and a great kid who was very serious about his family. Todd may have stopped into the Half Moon Bar and Grill before he headed to the party on that night of July 11th, 2005, but it seems he arrived at the party around 9:30 p.m. He was dropped off along with several friends by a designated driver and proceeded to just enjoy himself at the party for several hours. These parties were on land owned by a man named Richard Carlson, and according to him, it was one of his sons who had actually organized them. They did the parties in their old apple orchard, which if you look at the area around Cazenovia, it is just apple orchards as far as the eye can see, but this one appears to have been overgrown and in disuse aside from these parties. One of Todd's friends, named Nicole Kohlenbrander, who was a bartender at the Half Moon, said that she had seen him there that night at the party, and he seemed happy. He was definitely a little intoxicated, but not sloppy, not, falling all over the place, just generally having a good time in a good mood. Sometime between midnight and 12:45 a.m., Todd informed his friends that he was just kind of not feeling it and he was going to head home. At 12:47 a.m., the friend who had actually driven Todd there called him, and it seems maybe asked where he was, why he hadn't stayed. It's unclear exactly what happened, but Todd responded and told the friend that he had simply had enough, and he was going to walk the mile and a half home, which, it's not that far to walk, and it was a nice summer night. I can't blame the kid. Oh, God, kid. And that felt natural.
Yeah.
Oh. No. This is like when somebody called me sir last summer and it felt like a punch in the gut. Yeah. Anyway, at 12:51, he called a female acquaintance of his, who is not named in any of the reports, but is mentioned in the police report. And allegedly, according to what I could find between newspapers and the police documents, he told this friend that he was lost and that he was in a field. Apparently, he told her that he was in a field twice, and then the call cut off. 2 more calls were attempted to that friend from Todd's cell phone until 12:57 a.m., but after that, nothing came from Todd's cell phone. Now, I will say a lot of the reporting here was not very good. There are things that are right in some newspapers that are wrong in others, and one newspaper will get something right that the other gets wrong, but the second one will get something right that the other one got wrong. The police reports aren't super helpful, nor were the Michigan State Police forthcoming. But from what I can tell, I'm wondering if maybe Todd didn't actually tell everybody he was leaving around midnight, but if instead that's the last time anybody saw him, I think it's possible that he may have left a hell of a lot closer to 12:45 a.m., given that he did get that phone call at 12:47, seemingly asking where he was. The reason I say that is because the distance from the orchard party to the road is extremely short. We're talking like a quarter of a mile, if that. If you were walking away from the orchard party, there's really only one direction that you can go because it's sort of ringed in by trees. If you are walking out of that orchard, it's really hard to get lost. So I find it difficult to believe that Todd could have left the party at midnight and been lost at 12:47 a.m. It could not possibly take 45 minutes to walk from where he was to any of the surrounding roads. On top of the uncertainty regarding precisely when Todd left the party, but we know it was between midnight and 12:45 a.m., aside from that, it's not clear precisely when the missing persons report was filed, but we do know that his family was out looking for him by the afternoon of the 12th. The first organized effort appears to have been made on June 13th, a Monday, and it included at least 100 people searching both the area of the party as well as Todd's home. At this point, the police had listed it as an endangered missing persons case. Unfortunately, despite people spending basically the entirety of the day on Monday searching, nothing was found. And reading through reports from the next day, June 14th...
Fucking whore, cocksucking motherfucking bastard, you...
However,
cocker,
that week,
spaniel, bitch!
Sent Todd.
I don't have enough swear words.
From the site of the party, directly south to White Road, and then east. Now, White Road itself is a dirt and gravel road, and when it gets to the pavement at N37, his trail just stopped. People continued searching throughout the rest of the week, but no new leads came about, and at some point during the week, again it's unclear because basically every single bit of reporting on this case from the time it happened has been deleted from the internet. It's very strange, but it's extremely difficult to access all of this. If the article was published prior to 2010, I had to use the Wayback Machine to find it, which I'm not saying that to claim there's some sort of conspiracy here. I'm just saying that, oh my god, it was difficult to track this stuff down. And I'm not saying that it's like,
if he's
it was
Canadian,
necessarily
they could've,
hard. It was just
if the
way
cops
harder
got a
than
hold of
usual.
him, they could have taken him
I
for
have
a
an easier
Twilight
time finding documentation
tour.
from the 1800s.
That's where they leave him in the middle of butt-fuck nowhere in sub-zero temperatures to freeze to death before they can get the salvation.
But the Michigan State Police immediately took over the case. Muskegon County was only assisting, despite the fact that it was well within their jurisdiction. So it's odd to me that the Michigan State Police stepped in and took over, but again, maybe I don't know all the details there. Nobody really would talk to me. That's a consistent issue we have with law enforcement, by the way. They just aren't forthcoming at all, even on cases that have been cold for a decade and a half. You're not going to solve it, I might. Well, Aiden, it would be a horrible thing if the collective, hive mind of the internet started solving cold cases. That would be terrible. How dare we bring closure to the families? Terrible. Shame on you.
If only bringing closure to families that are still grieving was more important than the reputation of some small town cops.
Right? Oh my god, I wish. That said, I don't mean to say anything bad about the Muskegon County Police. They actually did talk to me. It's just they couldn't tell me anything because they didn't know anything, because the Michigan State Police apparently did not share. And I will say, as of the time of filming, it is November 6th, correct? It is November 6th, 2023, and in just a few days, my Nittany Lions will be playing the Michigan Wolverines, and I must say, it is, Aiden, what time is it right now?
It is 8:27.
It's 8:27 p.m. and Michigan still sucks. I do have to give a bit of a shout out to Michigan State, however, on this one. As much as we do enjoy our rivalry with you guys, and I like to poke fun, a researcher from Michigan State was involved with this case, and we'll get to him, and he did some really cool work. So I do have to shout out Michigan State on that one. Great job, guys. But as I was saying with the story, the dogs were able to track his scent from the Orchard Party to White Road, east along White Road for a quarter of a mile, where the scent just stops dead at M37. After that, there were no further leads, and the search was suspended. 1,600 people was organized partially in coordination with the Missing You Foundation, which at the time was a group that helped people in the Midwest to search for missing family members. So far as I can tell, they have either changed their name or they are now defunct, but that is who helped out with the search at the time. Despite the very large search effort involved with this case, they still found absolutely no sign of Todd. So another search was planned, and this one would also include helicopters as had been used throughout the week, but then just before it was supposed to take place, it was canceled. You see, while not included in any of the reporting I've been able to dig up, it seems that the Michigan State Police did have some persons of interest early in the case. It seems that on the 21st or 22nd of the month, police received information which pointed much more strongly to those persons of interest. Basically, for whatever reason, foul play now seemed to be the most likely option. It was at this point that the search morphed into a suspicious death probe, with the police believing that Todd was no longer alive and had likely been hit by a car the night of the party. Police informed the family of their theory that Todd had been hit by a car and then buried somewhere on the 22nd of the month, and this was basically as the rumors began to swirl about who might have done it and how it might have happened and how did nobody hear about it. All the while, the police were trying to interview as many people as possible. And when I say that the rumors were swirling, the rumors were swirling. According to Vicky Green, a bartender at another one of Todd's hangouts called Kaz, Todd was very well liked, and this was like the talk of the town. Everyone was devastated. They couldn't figure out what had happened. Alongside interviewing essentially everyone that would admit they were at the party, which was another issue, that there were a lot of underage kids at the party, and while the police said, hey, if you were drinking at the party, we're not going to arrest you, we just want to know what happened to Todd, a lot of those kids still didn't come forward, possibly worried that their parents would be mad at them for being at the party and drinking anyway. And, as far as a lot of them were concerned, well, Todd still hadn't been found, so he might not be dead, so it's not a good line of thinking, but it is one that I can, follow. But alongside that, the police were also going to body shops and inspecting cars that were brought in for repairs. Basically, if it seemed like, maybe a car could have been involved in an accident with a person, they wanted to have a look at it. And they were asking around to see if anybody's story about how a car was damaged didn't quite line up with the damage to the car. For example, if you hit a person and were trying to hide it and said you hit a deer, well, deer and people are very different weights. Different weights mean different amounts of damage to the car, and the police might be able to track that down. Unfortunately, of the 2 cars that were involved with accidents that night anywhere within the vicinity of the town, neither of them were actually near Todd, and both of them were fully accounted for. And to make matters worse, all of their interviews were dead ends, with their persons of interest being cleared. Finally, on July 2nd, there was a break in the case, although not a happy one. Jim Wilde and his wife were taking their boat out onto Lake Avidhall for the day when they realized that their canoe was not usually where they had tied it off. And when they took their boat out to get it, they realized that it was also full of beer cans. And this was odd because, according to Jim, nobody had ever taken his boat before, or his canoe, and that was just not something that people did. They didn't borrow each other's boats, and the local kids were not known to borrow anybody's boats. It was also on this outing that Mrs. Wilde spotted another oddity. She thought she saw a beaver floating out in the lake, and when they got closer to the beaver, they realized it was not a beaver at all. It was the unfortunately lifeless body of 22-year-old Todd Guy. What was especially odd about it, though, was the position of Todd's body. Now, normally when somebody drowns, they float, and they float face down.
I like it. It's mine. The prices blow my mind. I feel so rich. I feel like a billionaire. I'm shopping like a billionaire. I'm shopping like a billionaire. I'm shopping like a billionaire. I get it straight from the makers. I'm shopping like a billionaire.
Download the Temu app and shop like a billionaire.
Hellmann's mayonnaise. Every dollop is so rich and creamy. Irresistible.
They float, and they float face down with most of their back, shoulders, and head up at the top of the water, and their legs might dangle down. And this is because of how the gases in your body build up and hold your upper body at the top of the water. And you would especially expect this of somebody who was 60 feet out into the lake. Todd was not found at the water's edge. He was a good distance into the water, and he was not floating the way you'd expect. Instead, he was basically standing. He was near vertical in that water. According to Jim, the exact position he was in was that his body was near vertical, and his head was kind of slumped over on his arm like this. And you may be sitting here thinking, well, Aiden, that's just an eyewitness account. Those are barely even admissible in court. Well, according to documents I obtained from the Muskegon County Sheriff's Office, this is very much what happened. According to them, Todd's body had to be lifted to a completely floating state and was 60 feet out on the lake. This tells us that his body was not in a completely floating state and that the Wildes were correct about how far into the lake he was. The finding of the body was first reported in newspapers, so far as I can tell, on July 5th, 2005, 3 days later, and he was reported as a suspicious death. Now, the medical examiner listed the cause of death as drowning, but that's actually where the case gets weird, because the manner of death is listed as undetermined. As for the cause of death being drowning, it seems that this conclusion was reached for two main reasons, those being that Todd was found in a body of water, and there was no other conceivable cause of death, because Todd had no external lacerations, he had no internal bleeding, there was really no other way to explain how Todd might have died. The only issue was that there was no water in Todd's lungs. Now, if you drown in a body of water, there will be water in your lungs. It is possible to dry drown, but that's not what they were saying here. They were saying Todd drowned in that lake, in which case there would be water in his lungs. There was not. But while Todd may not have had water in his lungs, what he did have was a blood alcohol content of 0.12%, as well as a staggering amount of amitriptyline and desipramine in his system. Both of these medications are antidepressants. I believe one is an SNRI and the other is an SSRI, but they are not the kind that would be prescribed together. Additionally, the level that was in Todd's system would have rendered him unconscious. He could not have walked to the lake with that much in his system. He would have been on the ground sleeping. And yet, despite the fact that there was no water in Todd's lungs and he had so much antidepressant in his system that he would have been rendered unconscious, the police believed Todd had simply, in his inebriated state, accidentally gone the wrong direction and fallen into the lake and accidentally drowned. This didn't really sit well with Todd's mother or with the broader community, and for good reason. There is a dense thicket of thorns between where the party was and the lake. Now, it's not impassable, though it would be very difficult to get through, especially if you were really drunk and on a heroic dose of antidepressants.
Heroic.
At the very least, had Todd, wearing summer clothing, gone through that thicket, he would have had numerous cuts and scrapes all over his body. And if he had fallen into the lake that night and drowned, then those would not have healed in the 3 weeks between when he disappeared and when his body was found, because his body would have been dead. And if you're like, oh, well, you know, maybe it was just that, you know, he had a long sleeve shirt on for some reason, and that's why. These were about like 2-inch thick thorns that we're 2-inch long thorns that we're talking about. The people that have been to the site and the people who own the property both said you're not getting through there without getting cut up. Additionally, 1,500 people, as well as helicopters, had and nobody had seen a body floating in the lake for that entire 21 days. As if this weren't enough already to make you really question if this was an accidental drowning, the night before the body was found, Jim Wilde's brother and his nephew were out on the lake fishing, and they were pretty much in the exact spot that this body was found at one point, and did not see it. Despite there being 2 people who were on the lake where the body was found the night before it was found, and 2 people on the lake who found the body, none of them were interviewed by police. And yes, you heard me correctly. The guy who found the body was not interviewed by the Michigan State Police in a formal setting. Like, that's not me calling him a suspect. That's me pointing out that the guy who found the body was not interviewed as part of the investigation, which is a level of that I simply can't comprehend. To top all of that off, Todd's body was in remarkable condition for somebody that had been sitting in a warm lake in June for 3 weeks. All of the evidence available at the time that Todd was found, at the time that this autopsy was completed, suggested that he did not accidentally drown. Despite all of that, the Michigan State Police maintained that this was an accidental drowning, that Todd was just drunk and wandered into the lake, even as Kathy Guide, Todd's mother, begged them to reopen the case. Fortunately, even if the Michigan State Police wouldn't do anything, that didn't mean that other people wouldn't. And over time, this story was spread around, people started to hear about it, and a former New York District Attorney by the name of Trish DeAngelis caught wind of it, and she managed to get a forensic pathologist named Dr. Michael Sikurka, to review the autopsy files, take a look at the case, and give his opinion as a medical examiner. Well, Dr. Sikurka took a look at the autopsy, and he also didn't think that Todd had drowned. So he showed it to some medical examiner and forensic pathologist colleagues of his, and they also agreed that it didn't look like Todd accidentally drowned. And, you know, that just, 3, 4, 5 maybe forensic pathologists, well, that's not all that many people, that's not a big deal. So they took it to an international medical examiners conference where over 200 medical examiners agreed it was very unlikely, in fact it seemed impossible, that Todd Guide had accidentally drowned. 200! Not only did they think that Todd didn't drown, they also noted that Todd's body showed that he had only been dead for 2 to 5 days at the most when he was found in that water, not the complete 3 weeks that would be required if he had drowned that night. Following these findings, a letter was sent to the Michigan State Police, which I have elected to read in its entirety as it is available online. Now, as I said earlier in the video, finding anything about this case requires using the Wayback Machine, so that's what I did, and the only copy that I could find did have some redactions because there were some rather graphic parts that they decided not to include on Kathy Guide's behalf. That letter reads as follows. Dr. Sikurka reviewed the autopsy report with respect to this case, as well as the photos taken of Todd's body during the recovery and autopsy. Dr. Sikurka and I have also reviewed police reports, read news statements from the couple who discovered Todd's body, and discussed the case with experts in the field of water recovery. In sum and substance, Dr. Sikurka found several conclusive pieces of medical evidence that convinced him that Todd died no more than 48 to 72 hours before his body was recovered. This is not consistent with the original finding that Todd died the night he disappeared and was in Auburn Lake for 21 days. For further review, we consulted with experts at Lifeguard Systems. They specialize in water rescues and recoveries and are brought in to consult on cases around the country. They showed pictures of Todd's recovery to more than 200 medical examiners, coroners, and death investigators at an international conference. They were told that the police concluded Todd accidentally drowned and was in the water for 21 days. All of these experts agreed that Todd's body had only been in the water for a few days, and not one expert believed he had been in the water more than 5 days. Dr. Sikurka and I are working on this case pro bono. If you will lend credence to the opinions of the experts we've consulted, the only conclusion is that Todd Guide was alive for close to 3 weeks after he disappeared and before he was recovered. We believe very strongly that this matter should be reopened investigation launched into the disappearance and death of Todd Guy. The police determined that Todd accidentally drowned in Ovid Hall Lake the night he was reported missing, before an autopsy or toxicology report was completed. They closed this case without a thorough review and without interviewing witnesses who were clearly suspicious. On behalf of Doug and Kathy Geib, we respectfully request that you open a new investigation into the death of their son. Todd's parents and 3 sisters always believed there was more to this case than a simple drowning. Dr. Sakurka and I are confident the evidence strongly supports that conclusion. This letter only touches on our findings and information regarding this case. We are available and eager to speak with you regarding this matter, as are Todd's family members. We can also send a copy of the autopsy report and the photos we received at your request. Our contact information is included herein. We sincerely thank you for your time and consideration of this important matter. So, in no uncertain terms, the vast majority of people who have reviewed the files of this case believe the police are wrong. It was strongly recommended by over 200 experts that this case be reopened and investigated as homicide. And a large part of this was the medical impossibility that Todd had been dead for more than 2 to 5 days when he was found. In response, the letter's recipient, Tony Tague, forwarded it along to Curtis R. Schron, a police lieutenant with the Michigan State Police, who claimed there is nothing to indicate the death of Todd Geib is anything more than an accidental drowning. He also claimed that they had received no new evidence since 2005 that would suggest that Todd was the victim of a crime, but obviously they had. This rejection, this decision not to reopen the case, was apparently the result of the opinion of Dr. Joyce DeJong, the chief medical examiner from Muskegon County, who I must say is either lying or terrible at her job. There is tons of evidence, and none of it suggests he drowned. In fact, the claim being made here is that Todd didn't drown. There's no evidence he drowned. The burden of proof is on the people claiming he drowned to prove he drowned, and they didn't. 3 years later, in 2012, Kathy once again rallied for her son's case to be reinvestigated, only for Police Lieutenant Chris McIntyre to tell reporters, "We haven't been presented any new evidence at all," which is a lie. That is just a lie. He was presented all of the new evidence in 2009, and this moron, Dr. DeJong, decided that it wasn't evidence. I would like to, right now, ask Dr. DeJong, if you're still working, if this video happens to find you, please tell me, precisely how does a man drown in a lake without getting water in his lungs? I'd also like to know how a man with so much desipramine and amitriptyline in his system that he can't possibly have been conscious walk to a lake. In fact, how does he make 4 separate phone calls? How does somebody who had to crawl drunk and also probably near unconscious under the circumstances through a thicket of 2-inch long thorns without a single laceration appearing on his body? I am 100% serious. You, Dr. Joyce DeJong, or anybody else who works in your department, if you're still there, please explain that to me. I would love to hear it. But since Dr. DeJong works for the government and is therefore not accountable, this case was just frustratingly in limbo for several years until finally the Oxygen Network TV show, The Smiley Face Killers, The Hunt for Justice, showed up and decided they were going to look at the case. That's right, the state police could not be bothered to investigate what was obviously a suspicious death. It had to be the Oxygen Network that did it. The Oxygen Network being the people to really, like, go out there and go get it is probably the only thing funnier than YouTubers doing it. But anyway, the team for that show brought in Dr. Eric Benbow, a forensic entomologist with Michigan State University. The detectives on that show, who were former New York City detectives, they wanted to find concrete proof that Todd's body was not in the water for 21 days. Now, this was in 2019, so this is pretty recent. In order to prove this, Dr. Benbow set up an experiment where he took several pig carcasses, dressed them in clothes similar to what Todd was wearing that night, and stuck them into a pond that matched the conditions of Ovid Hall Lake. And the carcasses were kept there for varying periods of time. One was 24 hours, one was 72 hours, one was 5 days, one was 10 days, and one was the full 21 days. And what they found was that within just 3 days, aquatic insects and blowflies had colonized the pig carcasses. When Todd was found, there was not a single sign of an insect on his body. Additionally, the carcass that had been in the water for 21 days was covered in a slimy algic film. A slimy algic film that was not on Todd Geib. Now, Benbow did say that it was possible the body had initially sunk to a deeper point in the lake where there were fewer insects, where it was colder, where decomposition would take a little bit longer. So this is kind of the opposite problem that we have in the case of the corpse of Brian Laundrie that was found in Florida. Brian's corpse, despite being submerged in water for 3 weeks, was completely decomposed, as in it was skeletal. Just a reminder that that sick bastard and his scumbag parents, as well as their, God, what's the best way to say this, piece of crap lawyer, still haven't answered for the pain they caused Gabby Petito's family. God, Aiden, do you know what time of year it is?
What time of year?
It's time for the Scumbag Lawyer of the Year award. Oh my God, and you know what? For the second year in a row, Stephen Bertolino wins. Oh my God, round of applause for Stephen Bertolino. Oh my God, good job, man. You are truly impressively awful, in my opinion. Archie, don't you agree that he's the worst lawyer in the world? Yes, you do. It's your opinion, too. Yes, you have 4 brain cells, and that's even more than he has. Allegedly. You know, we have to say allegedly, and in my opinion, you know, because of the implication. In the case of Todd Geib, however, between the 200 medical examiners and other experts who said, yeah, he was not dead more than 2 to 5 work, which proved that in 2 to 5 days, his body would at the very least have been colonized by so many insects, it was becoming very clear that this was not an accidental drowning. All evidence pointed to foul play, and yet to this day, even after the Oxygen Network aired that episode, the police still hold that this was an accidental drowning caused by alcohol. And if it seems like I kind of skipped over or like skimmed through the smiley face killers part, don't worry. We are going to cover that in a series of videos because we're kind of running out of missing 401 cases that have actual documentation, so this was good timing. This is both. Similar to the missing 401 phenomenon, the smiley face killers theory suggests that there are a large number of cases with similar aspects. In this case, there are 45 drownings of young men across the Midwest that they believe are connected, that the police have said are just accidental drownings. These deaths occurred between the years 1990 and 2019 and were identified as suspicious by former New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. The victims are college-age males, they are well-liked, they are athletic, they are popular, they are good-looking, and they are mostly white. The name, Smiley Face Killers, comes from the fact that in about 12 of the cases, there was a smiley face found either painted or stickered onto something near the body was found. In this case, according to Todd's mother, there was a smiley face spray painted to a tree and a sticker of a smiley face on Todd's grave that was found several years later. She also does say that there were other people who confirmed that the smiley face was there in the fall of the year he was found. The reason I am phrasing it the way I am is that Todd's mother said in the interview in the TV show that she had found out about the work that Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte were doing, and that after that she found the smiley faces. According to her, her immediate thought was, you know, is somebody screwing with me? Is this somebody playing some sort of sick joke? But the fact that the smiley faces were there did get Gannon and Duarte out there to look at the case. And really the hallmark of these cases is that despite evidence that this may not have been simply an accident, police are overly cautious or outright refuse to call these things murders. And since they're having a hard time even referring to these as homicides, they're obviously not going to buy into the theory that this is either some sort of organized crime or a serial killer. And the FBI also seems to be of that opinion. On the one hand, there could very well be no connection between any of these cases, and they are all really just isolated alcohol-related accidental drownings. On the other hand, the police screw up all the time, and in Todd Geib's case, they have their heads so deep in the sand they can probably taste oil. Now, if these were actually homicides,
I like that
there
one.
are 2 leading theories for who could be behind it, and those are serial killing or organized crime. However, in 2008, the FBI told reporters that they had not developed any evidence to support links between these tragic deaths, or that these deaths are the work of a serial killer. Now, of course, the only way the FBI would be involved in these deaths is if they were either organized crime or a serial killer. So it's not weird that the FBI isn't involved in the individual cases. But for a play-by-play of how bad the FBI is at recognizing foul play, or at how good they are at ignoring what is obviously foul play, please check out our video on Chuck McCullough. Chuck was just in a place he cannot possibly have gotten to without snowshoes, and it was so
This is not an ad for the Rainbow Burger meal. It's an ad for Artlist's ultimate AI voiceover.
Smoking with hypnosis? Yeah, right. Instead, start stopping with Thrive.
Remote and difficult to get there, that the rangers looking for him did not even bother to check that side of the park because they didn't think anybody could get there. In the same way that the FBI chalked Chuck McCullers' death up to somebody somehow getting 8 miles off trail in 9-foot deep snow without snowshoes and then dying of exposure, they chalk most of the smiley face killer's cases up to accidental drowning. But Todd didn't drown accidentally. In fact, he didn't drown at all. So let's go over the evidence. The last people to have seen Todd appear to have seen him leaving the party headed toward White Road. He said he was in a field at 12:51, and directly south of the party there was a field between him and White Road, and dogs tracked him from the Orchard Party to White Road and east to M37. Todd's trail inexplicably stops at M37, but dogs are not 100% reliable. Nevertheless, there is a dense thicket of thorn bushes north of where the party was between Todd and the lake, so all of the evidence suggests that Todd headed south. Now, another explanation for the scent trail could be that Todd was actually dropped off for the party at the intersection of M37 and White Road, but between the terrain, the witnesses, the phone calls, it seems very unlikely that Todd would have gone north towards Abbott Hall Lake. In fact, given that he had no scratches on him, it's impossible. When his body was found, there was no evidence that he had been dead for more than 5 days. In fact, all of the evidence pointed towards him having been dead for less than 3. The body also showed no signs of insect activity or significant algae growth, which would be expected after 21 days in the water. This was confirmed by those 200 experts and reinforced by Dr. Eric Benbow's study. The concentration of drugs in his system would have rendered him unable to walk, and therefore he cannot have had that many drugs in his system while he was at the party. If he somehow had walked in a drugged, drunken daze through that thicket of thorn bushes, he would have been covered in lacerations. So it seems to me that sometime after making his last call at 12:57 a.m. on June 12, 2005, Todd Geib was kidnapped by persons unknown, held for 15 to 20 days, drugged, and then put in the lake. He also was found with a blood alcohol content 1.5 times the legal limit for driving, which, when interacting with those antidepressants, could have and likely would have caused him to stop breathing. And while you may be thinking, well, couldn't he have just taken the drugs himself? Couldn't he have just been partying? Well, that's the interesting thing about the drugs he was on. They're not like party drugs. These are SSRIs and SNRIs. They don't make you high. Pharmacists confirmed this. These drugs are also not prescribed together, and Todd had not been prescribed either drug when he disappeared. This means he did not take these pills to get high, drink too much, and then pass out and fall into the lake. Todd must have been slipped the drugs and then forced to drink either by his assailant or possibly assailants. The reason I say assailants is because since these medications aren't prescribed together, then if this was simply somebody's own stash, there would have had to be 2 of them. There would have had to be somebody who had a prescription for amitriptyline and somebody who had a prescription for disipramine. Alternatively, the culprit could have had access to pharmaceutical drugs through their job, possibly a pharmacy tech, a nurse, a physician's assistant, or even a doctor. This person would have waited for Todd to leave the party, snagged him when he got to Newaygo Road, and then held him for the remainder of the time before choosing to end his life. When it was time to get rid of him, the assailant or assailants would have forced him to drink an amount of alcohol that would have put him similar to where he was after the party, drugged him, and then put him into the lake, most likely believing that he would inhale water as he breathed and drown. This likely would have been done to make it seem like an accidental drowning as a result of alcohol, when in reality, it was a homicide. I believe that the problem here was that the amount of drugs they gave Todd, coupled with the alcohol they made him drink, caused him to die before he went into the water, hence why there was no water in his lungs. To cover their tracks, they stole the canoe and filled it with beer cans to make it seem like Todd had stolen the canoe, drunk himself into a stupor, and fallen into the water. While any given medical professional would probably know what cocktail of medications to give somebody to end their life, they wouldn't necessarily know how long the process of decomposition takes. Hence the flaw in their otherwise pretty well thought out murder plan. And yet still there are some things that are unaccounted for. One of which is the fact that Todd told a female acquaintance that he was lost. White Road is less than a quarter mile from where the party was, and even if Todd were decently drunk leaving the party, he should have had a very easy time finding it. And of course, the only scent trail they found led east to M37. We also have to wonder how the perpetrator knew that Todd left the party when he did, and how he knew Todd left the party alone. Todd arrived at the party with friends, so nobody, without being there with him, could reasonably expect to know that he would leave by himself, or even when he would leave. It brings up a pretty big question. Why Todd? Was Todd actually the target, or was this simply an opportunistic killing? If Todd was the intended victim, then whoever did it would have known Todd's movements well enough to know he was at the party and to know when he left the party.
He was at the party with Todd, and it was drug involved.
Or they have to have been coordinating with somebody who was on the inside. And if Todd wasn't the target,
jealous
then what was the motivation? And
boyfriend. Was Todd dating anybody?
3 weeks without so much as a ransom note. There might be an explanation if Todd had any injuries on his body, but he didn't. It seems like
was the boyfriend, the former boyfriend of the girl he was dating.
Did not harm him for the full time they had him. Unfortunately, we're not going to get any of those answers about Todd Geib's case until the Michigan State Police are shamed into getting off of their asses to investigate what is obviously a homicide. And as for the smiley face killers, I guess we have our new missing 411. And I do realize it seems like I may repeat myself a lot in this video or when I'm covering these cases.
You do.
That's because I really do want to make sure you guys have all the details and that you have them fresh in your minds as we're going through. I don't want this to be the kind of thing where you're going, wait, how did we get here? Why did we have that conclusion? You know, I want you to understand my thought process, and if you see flaws in it, point them out, because that's the only way that we can get better, is if you guys help us. And another way that you can help us is by subscribing to our Patreon for just $1 a month. There are higher tiers, but we don't ask for more. You can also become a member here on YouTube. That's $5 a month, and it doesn't come with any of the fun perks, but, you know, you do get a free super chat every month. We also have several other channels, only really one of which is consistently getting new content right now, but we're working on it. Those are the Lore Lounge, the History Hut, the Weird Bible, and my channel, The Aiden Max. You can also check out our merch at lorelodge.shop, where you can feel like you're wearing our skin, or you can check out our Discord at bit.ly/jointhelodge, and if you want to catch these kinds of conversations or ask questions in the Q&A session, we have our live podcast here on YouTube every Sunday night around 7 p.m. It's football season, so things are a little weird right now, but you can come and you can ask questions there. And if you can't catch it live, but you do want to hear the conversation, you can always catch those on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, really anywhere you get podcasts. And of course, we would love to thank our partner for this video, Factor. It is a service that we actually use, we actually do enjoy them, and we really hope you try it out. All of that out of the way, I am Aiden Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lounge.
When the internet gives you ads, why not make it an ad for an ice-cold Mike's Hard Lemonade?
As many do with washed-up Hollywood celebrities, this video asks the question, where are they now? I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lounge. If you've been on the unsolved mystery side of YouTube's algorithm any time over the last 2 or 3 years, you've probably heard of the Missing 411 phenomenon, a case profile created by former police detective David Paulides and popularized by content creators such as Mr. Ballin. Missing 411 describes unsolved missing persons cases with a shared set of characteristics. And if you've been following our channel for a while, you're probably familiar with the fact that we have talked about these cases quite a bit. Now, these shared characteristics can be broken down into a few different categories, such as body location, state of remains, point of separation, natural features of the location, victim identity, and then some other miscellaneous points, such as there's a very high proportion of them that are German. While never explicitly stated within the Missing 411 books or documentaries, there is something of a subtext that someone or something is in fact taking these people. In this specific video, we're going to be talking about the cases that, even after extensive investigation, we still really don't have a solid idea what happened, and maybe David Paulides is right. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the cases where it seems like that might be an option. To be clear, we have looked at a lot of these cases, and most often, more often than not for sure, we do find that there's a mundane explanation. So I don't want to start off this video with you thinking that we're going to throw it at you that the Wendigo is responsible for this, or skinwalkers are doing it, or that they're slipping into dimensional rifts and there are portals all over the world. So if you're wondering, is this all stuff I've heard before, the answer may shock you. No. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at those cases where there's really just no good explanation. This video is going to include a number of things that will include corrections, additional details, stuff that we had missed in the past that we are now bringing to the front of the video so that you can get the most correct story available. And most importantly, we're going to be kind of drilling down into what really connects the 5 cases we've chosen for this video. After all the missing 401 we looked at, these are the 5 that really stick out to me that I just don't understand, and we felt that was worth discussing. But in order to do that effectively, we have to explain the case profile to you. If you've seen this before, I'm sorry, but for the new viewers. To begin with, we have the victim ID set of characteristics, which dictate that victims are mostly male, either very high or very low intelligence, typically white, and also more frequently of German heritage. And in some cases, disabilities were considered as contributing factors. This also shouldn't be taken to mean that you can't have a woman of average intelligence who is also black and missing and be a missing 411 case, as that person could end up fulfilling all of the other traits that make something a missing 401 case. You don't have to be a...
I'm done. I'm done. I'm done for the night. It's been a good run, but I think I'm done. Yes, if you're having any trouble with your smoothness and it's rough, you can sand it, but you can also just remelt it with a lighter. It's a lot easier. Fuck up, these horns are so cute. Too wide anyway. Alright, fuck it. I think I'm done for the night. I think I got something done. Oh. Alright. If you stop by, thanks. If not, don't worry about it. I'll catch you on the next one. Good night, guys.